Part 54. The Prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 531. Shen Shuwei lay on top of him, resting his head on his neck and playing with his long dark hair. Although they have slept together in the same bed for the past few days, they are more pure than brothers and have no intimate behavior at all. After Lin Xian was shocked, he realized something was wrong. He looked at Shen Shuwei who was lying on top of him, and he didn't even think of letting her get down just now. She was seen playing with her hair. Wondering what's so fun about hair? Shen Shuwei suddenly raised his head. You haven't told me the answer yet. Shen Shuwei suddenly raised his head, and his body moved accordingly. The two of them were originally close to each other, without any gaps. The slightest movement would cause inevitable contact. Lin Xian's face turned red and he even breathed a little heavier. You are worrying unfoundedly. Shen Chu thought for a moment and said, it's going to rain. My mother wants to get married. If a man wants to marry again, there's nothing he can do to stop her. After figuring this out, Shen Shuwei stopped thinking about it. The worst result would be that Xiao Jinyan broke his promise and she would become a princess in name only. Lin Xian was not interested in this topic at first, but now he suddenly became curious again. What will happen to you if you really get married? Shen Chu slightly lay on his chest and said calmly, what can I do? Just eat it cold, it won't affect me from continuing to be a salted fish anyway. Lin Xian asked, didn't you just say that you won't share the same husband with others? Why don't you care now? Shen Chu said faintly, serving a husband together requires practical actions. As long as I don't sleep with him, I don't count as serving a husband together. Taking the position of the princess, it's good to eat and drink, and it's cost-effective. Lin Xian understood now and was inexplicably angry. Since you love your husband so much, shouldn't you stop it when you find out that your husband wants to marry someone else? Why are you still indifferent? Shen Chu said softly, didn't I tell you? You already know and insist on marrying someone else. Do you still want to steal the groom from me in front of everyone? It sounds exciting, but it's actually boring. Lin Xian snorted coldly, you clearly don't care. If you did, how could you not stop me? Shen Chu curled his lips slightly, thinking that what he said was clear enough, but he didn't expect that he still thought that he didn't care. She held up her upper body angrily, stared at that handsome face for a long time, and said one sentence at a time, you think I will hold you in tears on your wedding day, letting you marry someone else and then forcing you to give up marrying someone else is what you call caring, right? Lin Xian was stunned when she heard this. Her voice was always soft, like chatting, and she rarely said a long paragraph so seriously. Shen Shuwei added, it turns out that in your eyes, crying, making trouble, and hanging are the only things you care about. However, the candy I begged for is not sweet, but very bitter. Lin Xian couldn't say a word at this moment, and he didn't know why he cared so much about her casual words just now. He didn't mean that crying was what he cared about. He just thinks taking action is what he cares about. Shen Chu slightly hugged his neck, looking from those picturesque eyebrows to his sexy thin lips. Jin Yan, how about a good night kiss before going to bed? She was just saying hello, not asking for his opinion. Before she finished speaking, she lowered her head and kissed his lips. Lin Xian opened his eyes wide, and when he reached out to push her away, he found that the place he touched was extremely soft. After being stunned for 2 seconds, he realized where he touched, and his face immediately became hot. Shen Shuwei grabbed Xiao Jinyan's hand and intertwined their fingers with his. It wasn't just a quick kiss. Shen Shuwei showed off almost all the kissing skills he had learned throughout his life. Lin Xian had endured so much hardship these days, how could he withstand her wanton behavior? He also had doubts about his identity, but he never found any evidence to prove it. It was undeniable that he had no ability to resist Shen Shuwei's kiss and responded quickly. They had such a tacit understanding and fit, as if they had done this often before. Shen Chu kissed her gently and then pulled away. In the past, it was only when she was about to die that Xiao Jinyan would let go of her and give her a chance to breathe. Now, she can also call the shots. Lin Xian was in high spirits when he suddenly stopped. He frowned with dissatisfaction. When he reacted, he realized that he could not withstand her temptation. "Good night, husband." Shen Shuwei turned over contentedly, lying next to him, holding his arm and planning to sleep. Lin Xian was stunned for a while, seemingly unable to react, and it ended just like that. The kiss just now, coupled with Shen Shuwei's unintentional move, was already a bit emotional. His chest was rising and falling violently, and he could not calm down his restless heartbeat in a short period of time. He looked sideways at the culprit, who had closed his eyes and slept. He took a deep breath helplessly, trying to calm down his excited mind and body. After a while, Lin Xian was sweating profusely and veins popped up on his forehead. He stared at the sleeping person and said through gritted teeth, "You are here to torture me." Shen Shuwei slept soundly, unaware that the man beside him had been up all night. The next day, Shen Shuwei woke up and found that Xiao Jinyan was still asleep. She found that he, who had always gotten up early during this period, also started to sleep. If the pulse diagnosis hadn't revealed no problem, she would have suspected that he was sick. It had just rained last night, and the temperature today was a little lower than yesterday. Shen Shuwei carried the medicine box to check Wang Jingyuan's pulse. His health had been stable, and she wanted to ensure that he could stabilize his condition after she left. She met Wu Tan on the way there, and she found that Wu Tan was not in a good state of mind recently. She smiled and greeted, "Little Master Wu Tan, are you going to visit the third master?" Wu Tan nodded and said warmly, "Well, it's rare to get together and I want to have a chat with him." Shen Chu nodded slightly and looked at his face. As a doctor, it was easy to detect that the other person was in poor health through his face. "Little Master Wu Tan, are you sick? You look so bad." Wu Tan shook his head, "I just haven't had a good rest, so don't worry." "Really?" Shen Shuwei was a little worried, "would you like me to take your pulse? You'll be fine soon." Wu Tan spoke slowly, "It's really okay. You'd better check on Jing Yuan first. I think he's not in good health." "Okay then." Shen Chu looked at it for a few moments and then looked away. When he arrived at Wang Jingyuan's room, he had just woken up and was drinking tea. Seeing them coming, he smiled and said, "Hello, I was just about to ask you to go out for fun, but I didn't expect you to come." Wu Tan said warmly, "The most important thing for you now is to cultivate yourself. When you are well, you will have time to play in the future." Shen Shuwei put down the medicine box and said, "I'll check your pulse first." Wang Jingyuan nodded, "Okay." Shen Shuwei followed the procedure and began to check Wang Jingyuan's pulse. The pulse was weak and stable, and his condition was stable. As long as there was no emergency, he would be fine. "Take your medicine on time, pay attention to rest, and spend half an hour in the sun every day, and you will be fine." Wang Jingyuan responded one by one, "I know. I didn't expect that you have such great medical skills at such a young age." Shen Shuwei said humbly, Your condition is stable, I have to leave here too." Wang Jingyuan asked, "Where are you going?" "Go somewhere else." Shen Shuwei did not say where she was going. Wang Jingyuan looked at Shen Shuwei. He should have known that she would leave after his condition stabilized. Maybe because of the similarity with Feng Wu, he was a little reluctant to be separated. "Can't you stay a few more days?" Shen Chu shook her head slightly. She wished she could go back to Daxia immediately, but Xiao Jinyan was going to Nanzhao Kingdom, and she had to accompany him. Wu Tan asked doubtfully, "What about Lin Xian? Do you think he is Xiao Jinyan? Do you want to take him with you?" Shen Shuwei shrugged helplessly, I can't take him away, but I want to be with him again. Wang Jingyuan knew that Shen Shuwei had always believed that Lin Xian was Xiao Jinyan, but during this period of time, he didn't realize that he had remembered anything. Is it possible that you made a mistake? Shen Shuwei said firmly, no, he is Xiao Jinyan. Wang Jingyuan said, I hope he is, otherwise it will be too difficult to find someone in the huge crowd. By the way, although your condition is stable, there is one thing I still want to say, you cannot stop taking your medicine. Another saying is that living for 2 years is considered a long time. The reason why she didn't say anything was that she didn't want to increase the psychological burden on the patient. With a good attitude, a miracle might happen. Wang Jingyuan nodded, I remember. After leaving Wang Jingyuan's house, Shen Shuwei suddenly felt a little heavy. Wu Tan looked sideways at her, and when he saw her frown, he became a little worried. I see you seem a little unhappy, what's the matter? I'm fine. Maybe because we are about to be separated, I will always be a little sad, Shen Shu said humbly. Wu Tan chuckled, I'm leaving here too. Shen Shuwei asked curiously, where are you going? Wu Tan said, I want to go back and have a look. Go back and have a look, Shen Shuwei guessed, hometown. Wu Tan smiled and nodded, that's right. I've been out for too long. It's time to go back and take a look. Shen Shu nodded slightly in agreement, yes, I also want to go back to Daxia. Wu Tan said warmly, I hope you can return to Daxia soon. Shen Shu slightly arched his eyebrows and said, with your good words, I will be able to return to Daxia soon. Shen Shuwei and Wu Tan returned to the guest room together, and saw Xiao Jinyan and Wang Leiwen visiting the garden from a distance. Xiao Jinyan was sitting in a wheelchair, being pushed by Wang Leiwen. Only she and Qin Xiao knew that Xiao Jinyan could walk. Wang Leiwen thought Xiao Jinyan could not walk yet. Wang Leiwen was always domineering, but now she smiled very happily, as if she was afraid that others would not know that she was very happy. Shen Shu puffed his cheeks slightly and walked over, his eyes falling on Xiao Jinyan, are you strolling in the garden? Lin Xian raised his head and looked at Shen Shuwei, and said calmly, well, Dr. Shen is here. When Wang Leiwen saw Dr. Shen, a flash of displeasure flashed in his eyes. He finally had time to take a walk with Lin Xian, but he came to disturb him, showing no sign of appreciation at all. Shen Shuwei asked again, what are you talking about? Are you so happy? Wang Leiwen snorted, of course it's a happy thing. Is there any problem, Dr. Shen? There's nothing wrong with it. It's just that young Master Lin has just recovered his eyesight, so it's not appropriate to see the sun for a long time. Shen Shuwei opened his eyes and thought. Really? Wang Leiwen stared at Lin Xian's beautiful phoenix eyes in confusion. Of course, I'm a doctor. Mr. Lin's eyes were seriously injured. If he's not careful, he could easily lose his sight again. Regarding the last sentence, Shen Shuwei deliberately emphasized his tone. Although Wang Leiwen was still a little confused, she still pushed Lin Xian towards the house. Shen Shuwei looked at Wang Leiwen's actions and suppressed laughter. Once inside, everyone sat around the table and drank cool tea. Lin Xian pretended to be careless and said, Princess Leun, I will leave here in a few days. Good night, Spicy. Please support with monthly votes and recommendation votes. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Iyun Si. Chapter 532. Wang Leiwen paused while drinking tea. She didn't expect Lin Xian to leave so soon. But your injury hasn't healed yet. Can you take a few more days to recuperate? Wang Leiwen's words clearly meant to keep him. Shen Shuwei heard it, and Lin Xian naturally heard it too. I've been out for too long. I'm afraid my parents will miss me, so I need to go back. Besides, I've been recuperating for many days and my injury has recovered well. Wang Leiwen naturally didn't want Lin Xian to leave. She looked at his legs and said, your legs haven't healed yet. How about waiting until your legs are healed before leaving? Lin Xian looked down at his legs, then looked up at Wang Leiwen, with a faint smile on his lips. Thank you Princess Leiwen for your concern. My legs have improved a lot, thank you for taking care of me during this period. Shen Shuwei saw Xiao Jinyan actually smiling at another woman. He would never smile at any woman before. Sure enough, her worries were correct. Xiao Jinyan, who had lost his memory, had forgotten his true nature. She picked up the mung bean cake on the plate and saw Wu Tan beside her. She almost ignored Wu Tan who came with her. His complexion was really bad today. He was originally white and tender, This description is not appropriate. It should be too white with a bit of sickly paleness. Maybe it's because of the climate and water? She handed the mung bean cake in her hand. Master Wu Tan, eat some mung bean cake to cool down. Wu Tan saw the mung bean cake in front of him, raised his eyes and saw a pair of bright eyes with a faint smile. He reached out and took the mung bean cake. Thank you, Dr. Shen. Shen Shuwei said, you're welcome. Wu Tan smiled and put the mung bean cake into his mouth and took a bite. There was a hint of cool sweetness in his mouth. It was not sweet and delicate, and tasted better than the imperial cakes in the palace. He looked up at her and praised her generously. It's delicious. Did you make it yourself? Shen Shuwei shrugged helplessly. Well, if you want to eat it, just make it yourself. As she said that, she took a piece of mung bean cake and stuffed it into her mouth and took a big bite. She squinted her eyes in satisfaction. She hadn't eaten it for a long time and was almost dying of greed. Wuyutan praised, you are amazing. Lin Xian watched the two people in front of him eating and laughing. A monk didn't stay in the temple to burn incense and worship Buddha, but came to the secular world to get involved in the fireworks. Talking and laughing with a monk in front of him, and calling him husband all the time. Who is chatting and laughing with another man in front of her husband? Mr. Lin. Lin Xian was sulking in his heart, and he didn't react until Wang Leiwen called him for the third time. He looked at Wang Leiwen calmly and said casually, thank you Princess Leiwen for your kindness. I'll stay for a few days. Wang Leiwen nodded happily, okay. Then her eyes fell on Lin Xian's legs. Can your legs walk? Lin Xian nodded, well, you can walk for a while, but you can't be too tired. That's good, as long as your legs are better, you don't need a wheelchair. Wang Leiwen was looking forward to walking around the garden with him shoulder to shoulder. Then tomorrow, I'll take you to the square for a walk, how about it? Lin Xian glanced at the two people who were still talking and laughing and responded perfunctorily, okay. Then it's settled. Wang Leiwen happily picked up the teacup and took a sip of tea. Lin Xian looked at Shen Shuwei, only to see her take a big bite of mung bean cake, tilting her head to talk and laugh with Wu Tan. Her cheeks were bulging like buns, and her words were unclear. He frowned, and even mung bean cakes couldn't stop your mouth. I plan to make dinner myself, you can order a dish. Shen Shuwei thought for a while and said, is your complexion bad because of the climate and water? You can eat some heavy-tasting dishes. What do you want to eat? Wuyutan was stunned at first, then chuckled, I'm not picky, I'll eat whatever you cook. Well, it's too painful for you to eat meat as a monk. Shen Shuwei looked at Wuyutan with sympathy. Wuyutan laughed softly. Master said that there is no such thing as pain in cultivating the mind and body, but... Shen Shuwei asked, but what? Wuyutan looked at Shen Shuwei with pure eyes without blinking, thinking of the scene when she wanted to eat roasted rabbit meat in the White Horse Temple and caught the rabbit herself. For you, it is a very painful thing. That's right, I have no fate with Buddha, Shen Shuwei said and stuffed all the mung bean cakes in her hand into her mouth. Wu Tan chuckled when he heard this, just be happy. Lin Xian couldn't listen anymore and coughed twice, Dr. Shen. Shen Shuwei's hand just reached into the plate, and when he heard this, he looked up at Xiao Jinyan, Lin Xian pursed his lips and looked at her without saying a word, but in his heart he was thinking, he knew to give mung bean cake to Wu Tan, but he didn't know to give mung bean cake to me. Shen Shuwei saw that he didn't say anything for a long time, so he had to ask, "What's wrong?" Lin Xian was angry, glanced at the plate of mung bean cake on the table, and asked lightly, "Mung bean cake, is it delicious?" Shen Shuwei looked at the plate, picked up a piece of mung bean cake, and smiled and said, "It's delicious, do you want to try it?" Lin Xian said lightly with an indifferent tone. Shen Shuwei handed the mung bean cake in her hand to him. Lin Xian glanced at the mung bean cake, and took the mung bean cake in her hand with a reluctant look. He looked at the mung bean cake in his hand. There was a pattern on it. The pattern was a peach blossom, which was very delicate. He took a bite with anticipation. It was slightly cool, with just the right amount of sweetness, and tasted really good. Shen Shuwei asked while eating mung bean cake, "Do you have any special dishes you want for dinner? You can order one dish." Lin Xian heard clearly just now that Shen Shuwei also wanted Wu Tan to order a dish, so in her heart, there is no difference between her husband and Wu Tan? He couldn't help asking, "Why one?" Shen Shuwei comforted, "We are outside, so don't be picky. Ordering one dish is already good, and there may be ingredients." Lin Xian, "Then why do you let me order dishes?" Shen Shuwei smiled and said, "Maybe the dishes you ordered have ingredients." Lin Xian. Wu Tan finished the mung bean cake, picked up the teacup in front of him and took a few sips. He glanced at the two people in front of him, and he lowered his eyes and continued to drink tea. Shen Shuwei stood up after eating the mung bean cake. "You sit for a while, I'll go to the kitchen." After that, he walked out with a happy step. Wu Tan also stood up, but was stopped by Lin Xian. "Where are you going?" Wu Tan saw Shen Shuwei go out, so he immediately stood up and followed. Without asking, he knew that he wanted to follow Shen Shuwei. Lin Xian was asking knowingly. Wu Tan stopped and looked back at Lin Xian, his voice as indifferent as his eyes. "Where I go, does it have anything to do with you?" "It has nothing to do with me." Lin Xian changed the subject, "but she said I was her husband, and she is a married woman. Shouldn't you, a monk, avoid suspicion?" "I know my own limits, don't worry about me," Wu Tan said and turned away without waiting for Lin Xian's answer. Lin Xian watched Wu Tan's straight figure walk out of the door. He pursed his lips tightly, and saw Swichuan sleeping beside him. He called out, "Swichuan." Swichuan was sleeping soundly and didn't hear his call. Lin Xian turned his head to look at the table and saw a few green fruits on it, which were picked by Shen Shuwei. He picked one up and threw it at Swichuan. The green fruit hit Swichuan's head, but Lin Xian controlled the force and didn't hit him hard. Swichuan opened his eyes and looked at Xiao Jinyan in confusion. "Is it really okay to disturb a cat's sweet dream?" Lin Xian waved at him, "Come here." Swichuan ran down from the couch helplessly, flew into Xiao Jinyan's arms, raised his furry head and looked at him, as if waiting for him to speak. Lin Xian found that Swichuan really listened to him, as if he was its owner. Shen Shuwei said that Swichuan was his pet and very smart. Let's go to the kitchen." He picked up Swichuan and went out. Swichuan nestled in Xiao Jinyan's arms. It was naturally happy to be held by someone, which was more comfortable than running. As soon as he walked out of the door, he saw Qin Xiao, who claimed to be his personal bodyguard. "Where are you going, master?" Lin Xian said calmly, "Go out for a walk." "Master, the crown princess said that your legs have just recovered and you have been exercising for a long time today. You should not overwork," Qin Xiao reminded. Lin Xian. Qin Xiao said again, "Master, I heard from the crown princess that you are going to Nanzhao Kingdom. Do you need me to prepare a carriage in advance? Or prepare horses in advance?" Lin Xian frowned, "You have nothing to do now, right?" Qin Xiao lowered his eyebrows and closed his eyes. "I have nothing to do for the time being." Lin Xian said, "Then go and look after your crown princess." Qin Xiao raised his head and looked at his master in confusion. What are you looking at the crown princess for? Lin Xian raised his eyebrows. Do I need to teach you this? I will go to find the crown princess now. Qin Xiao walked out with doubts. When he walked away, he looked back and saw that the master was no longer at the door. What does the master mean? When Qin Xiao came to the kitchen and saw Shen Shuwei busy in front of the stove, he was even more confused about what his master meant. Why did he look at the crown princess? Until he saw Wu Tan burning the fire, he seemed to understand something. For dinner, Shen Shuwei prepared her favorite dishes, including braised pork and for happiness meatballs. The steaming hot food was served on the table, and Shen Shuwei served the two of them. Husband, it's time to eat. Lin Xian was already hungry at this time. Listening to the cheerful voice made Lin Xian even hungrier than seeing the delicious food. He picked up the chopsticks and picked up a for happiness meatball, watching Shen Shuwei eat the braised pork, and then glanced at her belly. She was wearing men's clothes, and her lower abdomen was flat. She didn't see any weight gain even though she ate so much meat every day. Shen Shuwei ate 3 pieces of braised pork and picked up a for happiness meatball. While eating, she asked, Husband, are you going to Nanzhao this time to find back your memories in Nanzhao? Lin Xian had just taken a bite of the for happiness meatball when he heard her mention her husband again. A hint of doubt flashed in his eyes. Has your husband been to Nanzhao before? Shen Shuwei puffed her cheeks and said vaguely, Yes, you stayed in Nanzhao for several years, but you forgot before you came back. Lin Xian paused while chewing, thinking that he wanted to go to Nanzhao with all his heart. In fact, he didn't know what to do in Nanzhao, but his brain seemed to be pulled by something. Is it really like what Shen Shuwei said, to find the lost memory? Shen Shuwei saw that he lost a lot of weight without eating braised pork, so he should eat more meat. She picked up 2 pieces of braised pork and put them in the bowl in front of him. Husband, have some braised pork, it's not greasy. Lin Xian looked at the meat in the bowl. The fat and lean meat were evenly distributed, the color was good and it made people very hungry. He raised his head and looked at Shen Shuwei, and saw her pick up a piece of braised pork and put it into her mouth, eating it very deliciously. As expected, eating with her, it was very appetizing. He picked up the braised pork and put it into his mouth and took a bite. It was not as greasy as he imagined. Isn't he the prince? Why did he stay in Nanzhao for a few years? You went to Nanzhao as a hostage. I'm also curious about what happened to you in Nanzhao in the past few years. In fact, she was more curious about who Fenghui was. I see, Lin Xian said faintly. Nanzhao is the strongest of the 6 countries. It was almost unified by the 6 countries. Not only Daxia sent the prince to Nanzhao, but other countries were not spared. Shen Shuwei was a little surprised when he heard this. So powerful? Then, as the prince of Daxia, will it be dangerous for you to go to Nanzhao like this? Lin Xian said, It's not blatant. Only you think I'm the prince of Daxia, and others don't know. That's right, disguise yourself. If you don't say it, who will know? Shen Shuwei was relieved and continued to eat the food in the bowl. Shen Shuwei ate half of it and suddenly asked, You said that Nanzhao is so strong, there should be a lot of delicious food, right? Lin Xian raised his head and looked at Shen Shuwei, only to see her eyes shining. She really couldn't forget to eat at any time. Before going to bed tonight, Shen Shuwei lay beside him, holding her chin with one hand, and asked with a smile, Jinyan, do you want a good night kiss tonight? Lin Xian's eyes subconsciously fell on her lips, which were faintly pink under the light, as if tempting him to pick them. Every night, he had to use all his self-control to endure the beauty in his arms. No matter how tempting the kiss was, it was to torture him. No. Shen Shuwei was a little confused. Why? Didn't you like it last night? Lin Xian didn't want to discuss the kiss last night. He still wanted to sleep well and rest up. Who likes it? Sleep. Shen Shuwei curled her lips and pretended to sigh, a couple living like us will divorce sooner or later. Divorce, Lin Xian thought about it for a while and guessed, you mean divorce. Shen Shuwei nodded, yes, the disharmony between husband and wife is reflected in this. Lin Xian was stunned at first, then looked at her sideways. They were close to each other, and his nose was full of the peach blossom fragrance on her body. Just thinking about it made him feel hot. Do you really want to? Shen Shuwei smiled and took the initiative to hug his neck. Jinyan, don't you want to? The moment Shen Shuwei took the initiative to stick to him, Lin Xian lost all his last bit of self-control, probably because he began to feel that he was her husband, so he had no resistance to her. Shen Shuwei took the initiative to kiss him, pressed his lips against his, and called, Jinyan. Her voice was sweet and soft like honey that could not be melted, and Lin Xian was a bee collecting honey, who could not restrain his instinct to collect it. From the initial cautiousness to the final eagerness, Shen Shuwei felt that he seemed to remember, because Xiao Jinyan would kiss her like this. At the same time, Wang Leiwen thought that she could go out with Lin Xian tomorrow, so she began to think about what to wear tomorrow. When she returned from the closet, she saw a black figure passing by in a flash. A trace of doubt flashed in her eyes, and when she came to the table, she saw a letter on the table. Good night. Please support with monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 533. Wang Leiwen picked up the letter and looked around in doubt. Then she came to the window and looked outside. It was late at night and it was pitch black outside. Only the vague shadows of trees could be seen. She looked down at the letter and opened it with doubt. She saw a sentence written on it, saying that Lin Xian would not come back after leaving. After reading the sentence, Wang Leiwen's eyes were more confused. Who wrote this letter? Why did he say that Lin Xian would not come back after leaving? She clenched the letter in her hand, and felt uneasy. Lin Xian was saved by her, and she wanted him to marry into her family. How could he not come back? The next morning, the warm sunlight shone on the window sill. Lin Xian slowly opened his eyes and found that it was already bright. He knew it was late without asking. He turned his head to look at the person next to him, only to see that her eyes were closed tightly, and tears were faintly visible at the corners of her eyes. At this time, she was sleeping very soundly. The thin blanket barely covered her armpits, revealing a large area of fair skin. Even after a night, she still remembered that it felt smoother and more delicate than white jade. Her waist-length black hair was casually scattered on her shoulders, but it could not cover the traces left last night, which was particularly conspicuous on her snow-white skin. Lin Xian's throat tightened when he saw it. Thinking of what he had done last night, he covered his eyes and took a deep breath, and kept thinking about what happened last night. Although Shen Shuwei took the initiative at the beginning, he still had poor self-control. After a few times, he started a fire, like a prairie fire that could not be restrained. He was the one who took the initiative later, and he was also the one who did not let her go when she begged for mercy. Lin Xian took a deep breath again, moved his hand away, and saw a sleeping face, still with the blush of last night. Shen Shuwei, who was sleeping soundly, might feel hot. She kicked off the quilt on her body, revealing more snow-white skin. She adjusted her sleeping position and slept more deeply. Lin Xian lowered his eyes to look at the person who was still sleeping. He couldn't help staring at her until his face turned red. He reached out and pulled the quilt to cover her again. Although he guessed it, it was another matter to see it with his own eyes. Lin Xian got off the bed quietly, put on his clothes and walked out. While washing up, he couldn't help thinking about what happened last night. He didn't drink last night, so he remembered the whole process. Not only did he remember it, but he remembered it very clearly. He couldn't forget it even if he wanted to. When Shen Shuwei woke up, she found that she was the only one in the bed. She stretched and found that her limbs were sore. Sure enough, people who don't exercise for a long time are more likely to get tired. As soon as she opened her mouth, her voice was hoarse from overuse. She crawled out of the bed, and when her feet landed on the ground, it seemed as if she was stepping on cotton, soft and powerless. She dressed slowly. After getting dressed, Shen Shuwei walked out with a tired body, and saw Xiao Jinyan sitting at the table drinking tea. It was not an exaggeration to describe him as refreshed and energetic. She didn't understand why the difference was so big after not exercising for a long time. Lin Xian saw that she woke up, and paused while drinking tea. He pretended to be calm and said, "Awake." Before the truth came out, Lin Xian was still a little uncomfortable after crossing that line last night. Shen Shuwei was calm and frank on the contrary. For her, it was just a common thing between husband and wife. "Well, I'm so hungry." Shen Shuwei came to the table and sat down, picked up the teapot and poured herself a cup of tea, held it up to her lips and drank a few sips. "I got up late today and didn't have time to make breakfast." Then he picked up the teapot and poured himself a cup of tea and continued to drink. Lin Xian listened to her hoarse voice and looked at her as if she was extremely hungry and was drinking water to fill her stomach. Last night before going to bed, he heard her say that she was hungry and wanted to have a midnight snack. "Qin Xiao has gone to get breakfast." "Wait a minute." As soon as he finished speaking, Qin Xiao came in with breakfast. He lowered his eyes and placed the dishes on the table one by one, along with 2 bowls of steaming lean meat porridge. Shen Shuwei looked at the dishes on the table. They were all made by her recently. She picked up a piece of glutinous rice cake and took a bite. Both sides were golden, crispy on the outside and glutinous on the inside. It tasted good. "Who made this meal?" "It tastes good." Qin Xiao replied, "It was made by the cook. I heard that the crown princess didn't go to the kitchen today, so she made it." Qin Xiao didn't name who it was, but Shen Shuwei guessed it. She had been in the kitchen for these days and had become familiar with those cooks. They had also learned a lot of cooking skills from them. In addition, she went there every day, so things like flour were placed in the kitchen, so they showed off their cooking skills. Shen Shuwei praised generously, "They learn very quickly, and the food they cook tastes good." Lin Xian glanced at the food in front of him, which was somewhat different from what Shen Shuwei said, and the appearance was not delicate enough. "Are you teaching them cooking?" "I didn't teach them on purpose. They were willing to watch and learn, so I taught them by the way." Shen Shu smiled and pointed at the food in front of him and said, "Look, now I don't have to cook it myself, and I can eat these meals." Lin Xian looked at the food on the table again. This was an unexpected gain. He raised the corners of his lips and smiled very lightly. There was a lot of noise in the house last night. Qin Xiao's martial arts were not weak. Even if he stood far away, he still heard it. Qin Xiao looked at the warm scene in front of him and believed that his master would soon recover his memory. He quietly withdrew. Shen Shuwei was really hungry. A bowl of porridge ran low in a short while. She started to eat the food again, and the steamed buns were gone in 2 bites. When she was almost done eating, she slowed down, ate the fried dough sticks in small bites, looked up at Xiao Jinyan, and smiled. "Husband, you were very proactive last night. Do you accept the fact that you are my husband?" Lin Xian was eating porridge. Hearing this, he almost choked on the porridge in his mouth. He tried to cough to relieve the discomfort of being choked, but no one came out. Shen Shuwei saw his flushed face and hurriedly picked up the tea and handed it to him. Lin Xian took 2 sips of tea with her hand. "Why is your reaction so big? Last night was also." Lin Xian really couldn't help it this time and sprayed directly. Shen Shuwei hurriedly took out a handkerchief to wipe him. After a while of frantic work, Lin Xian stopped coughing and his complexion returned to normal. Shen Shuwei couldn't help asking, "Did I say something wrong?" Lin Xian tried to calm himself down. "Eat, why are you saying these things?" Shen Shuwei asked persistently, "Then have you accepted it?" Lin Xian lowered his head and drank the porridge, not knowing whether he was embarrassed or didn't want to answer. Shen Shuwei pouted, "You weren't like this last night, you were." Lin Xian was afraid that she would say something else, so he picked up the meat bun in front of him and put it in her bowl. "Eat the meat bun." Shen Shuwei looked at the meat bun in the bowl, held the chopsticks tightly to pick it up, and looked up at Xiao Jinyan, only to see him lower his head to drink porridge, cold and noble, and he was simply a different person from Noah last night. She put the meat bun into her mouth and took a bite, and when she looked at Xiao Jinyan opposite, she snorted in dissatisfaction, "Men are really pigs." Lin Xian paused in drinking porridge, raised his head and looked at her in confusion. "What do you mean?" "I won't tell you." Shen Shuwei snorted and ate the rest of the meat bun into her stomach. "Lin Xian." She said something incomprehensible every day. Wang Leiwen dressed up today. She was a princess of noble status, and her food and drink expenses were incomparable to those of the nobles. She liked to wear red, which made her look enchanting and charming. She walked in happily and saw Lin Xian and Dr. Shen in the room. She frowned. Why were they here so early in the morning? When she looked at Lin Xian, she found that he could really stand up. She exclaimed happily, "Mr. Lin, can you really walk?" Lin Xian raised his head and looked at Wang Leiwen, and said softly, "Well, just can't walk for too long." Shen Shuwei. The physical strength last night didn't look like he couldn't walk for too long. "Then let's go." Wang Leiwen stepped forward happily and stretched out his hand to hold Lin Xian's arm, but Lin Xian avoided him calmly. He turned and came to the table. Wang Leiwen's hand stopped in mid-air. Seeing Lin Xian turned and walked towards the table, she didn't think much and took her hand back. When they were ready, Wang Leiwen took Lin Xian out. Shen Shuwei followed immediately, but her over-exercised legs were a little out of control and fell behind by a step. After Lin Xian came out, he looked back and found that Shen Shuwei didn't keep up. Looking at her walking posture, he guessed the reason and stopped to wait for her. Wang Leiwen noticed that Lin Xian stopped and asked in confusion, "What's wrong?" Lin Xian said, "Wait for her." Wang Leiwen glanced at Dr. Shen and saw his delicate skin and tender flesh. His face seemed to be able to squeeze out water. She was disgusted. The man looked like this, and it was clear that he was here to seduce people. "What are you waiting for him for?" Lin Xian explained, "She has been here for a while and hasn't gone out to play. It's a good opportunity to go out together." Wang Leiwen was angry when she saw Dr. Shen's weak appearance. She looked at Lin Xian and said with a slightly dissatisfied tone, "But, I made an appointment with you, why did you bring him?" Shen Shuwei caught up and happened to hear this. She smiled and said, "It's not just me, there are also Third Master and Master Wu Tan. It's more lively with more people." Lin Xian's face darkened when he heard this. He didn't expect Wang Jingyuan and Wu Tan to go too. Needless to say, it must be her who called them. Wang Leiwen's face was also a little ugly. She originally wanted to go out with Lin Xian alone, but now there are 3 more people. Is it still a date? Wang Jingyuan and Wu Tan came over one after another. "Are you ready?" Wang Leiwen couldn't help asking, "Brother, what are you going to do?" Wang Jingyuan smiled and said, "I have been lying in bed for these days because of my illness. Now I am finally better. Of course I have to go out for a walk. There are many people and it will be lively." Wang Leiwen was angry but couldn't say anything. The carriage was very spacious, more than enough for 5 people. Wang Leiwen wanted to sit with Lin Xian. She waited for Lin Xian to come in, but Wang Jingyuan came in first and sat next to his sister. Wang Leiwen saw him sit down and immediately became anxious. "Brother, sit over there." Wang Jingyuan said, "Why? Don't you like sitting with me?" "No, I want to sit with Mr. Lin." "Brother, go to the opposite side." Wang Leiwen pushed Wang Jingyuan, wishing to push him over immediately to make room for Lin Xian. "Explain, is there a baby?" Wondering why the male protagonist hasn't remembered why the two of them had sex? First of all, the male protagonist just doesn't remember, but his IQ is still there. With so much doubt and evidence, it is impossible for him not to doubt. In addition to the memory disorder, the male protagonist has long doubted his identity. He still likes the female protagonist even though he doesn't remember. After spending time together and inferring doubts, the male protagonist gradually accepts it from the beginning, but he just doesn't say it. The female protagonist is not stupid either. She can feel that the male protagonist begins to accept it from the details. Two people who really love each other can feel each other's affection with a kiss. Having a room together happens naturally, which is not outrageous. Good evening. Please support with monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 534. Wang Jingyuan looked at his sister pushing him hard and laughed angrily. "Brother is not as good as an outsider." Wang Leiwen retorted, "That's different." Wang Jingyuan said, "You are a girl, can't you be more reserved? How can you sit with other men? Do you want to keep your reputation?" Shen Shuwei came up and saw Wang Leiwen and Wang Jingyuan, brother and sister, and sat opposite them naturally. Wang Leiwen pushed his brother away for a long time but failed, so he wanted to change his seat. As a result, he just stood up and saw Dr. Shen sitting down. Then it was Lin Xian. After he came up, he sat down next to Shen Shuwei. Wang Leiwen saw it and glared at Wang Jingyuan angrily. Wang Jingyuan smiled and patted his sister's shoulder as if to comfort her. Wang Leiwen didn't appreciate it. If they didn't want to follow, she and Lin Xian would go out alone today for a date without being disturbed. Wu Tan was the last one to come up. He glanced at the people on both sides of the carriage calmly, and walked to Lin Xian and sat down calmly. Because Lin Xian sat in the middle, he didn't want to sit with Wang Leiwen, so he could only sit next to Lin Xian. After sitting firmly, the carriage moved slowly. No matter how stable the ancient carriage was, it would be a little bumpy. Lin Xian glanced at Wu Tan and always felt that this man had some intentions towards Shen Shuwei. He was not honest even as a monk. He was glad that he sat in the middle, otherwise Shen Shuwei would definitely suffer if she sat in the middle. Wu Tan sat upright, as if he didn't notice Lin Xian's disgusted look. Wang Leiwen looked at Lin Xian opposite. His handsome face made people unable to look away. Seeing Dr. Shen sitting next to him, he became more and more angry. He must have deliberately approached Lin Xian and wanted to seduce Lin Xian with his appearance. This kind of person is the most disgusting. Wang Jingyuan couldn't help but look at Shen Shuwei. She had been wearing men's clothes since they met. If she wore women's clothes, she would probably look more like Feng Wu. In the carriage, everyone had their own thoughts. When they arrived at the square, several people got off the carriage one after another. This was Shen Shuwei's second visit to the square. The first time was because of the water splashing festival. She slipped away after eating. She followed the Wang brothers and sisters to the right side of the square. After walking for about 10 minutes, she saw a river and needed a ferry. After the 5 people got on the boat one after another, the boatman began to slide the boat. Shen Shuwei looked at the ferry, which was about the same size as an ordinary yacht. There was a tea house on the boat. Under the guidance of the boatman, the 5 people walked into the tea house. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the other side. Shen Shuwei looked at the bustling street market on the other side. Everyone here was dressed luxuriously, and no one wore coarse cloth. It was at this time that she realized the difference between nobles and common people. Nobles came here for shopping, while common people went over mountains and ridges to the town of Guise. When shopping, Shen Shuwei has only one goal, that is to see if there are any delicious foods. So, when they really go shopping, Shen Shuwei shuttles between various food stalls. As long as she has not eaten the food that looks appetizing, she will buy it all. When paying, Shen Shuwei just took out her purse, and Wang Jingyuan had already paid for her with silver. She looked at Wang Jingyuan with a puzzled look. Wang Jingyuan smiled and said, "You treat my illness and send me food every day. I will treat you to delicious food. It's a courtesy." Shen Shuwei thought it made sense, so she didn't worry about who paid the money. Anyway, Wang Jingyuan had money, and this small amount of money was a drop in the bucket for him. This scene fell into Lin Xian's eyes, but it was not that simple. He saw that Wang Jingyuan looked at Shen Shuwei with eyes that were much more obvious than that of Wu Tan. He walked over and looked down at the food in her hand. Since he didn't know her, he asked casually, "What are you eating?" Shen Shuwei just took a bite and her mouth was full. Because it was her first time eating, she felt fresh. She raised the rice candy in her hand. "Rice candy, do you want to try it?" Lin Xian didn't really want to eat it. Seeing her hand it over, he nodded. He took the rice candy in her hand and handed it to his lips and took a bite. The sweetness was a bit too sweet. He didn't like sweets, and it was so sweet that his teeth hurt. Wang Leiwen saw it, walked over with dissatisfaction, glanced at the rice candy in Dr. Shen's hand, and his eyes were full of disdain. "What's so good about rice candy?" Shen Shuwei nodded in agreement. "Indeed, it's too sweet. It's okay to try it occasionally." Wang Leiwen originally wanted to slander his taste, but when he heard this, his face looked a little bad. Wang Jingyuan glanced at his sister, sighed helplessly, looked at Shen Shuwei, and said softly, "Keep going, there are more delicious foods ahead." Shen Shuwei became excited when she heard that there were many delicious foods. "Let's go." Wang Jingyuan saw her eyes shining, smiled, and continued to move forward. Lin Xian glanced at Shen Shuwei, and seeing her so excited, he felt that she wanted to follow him out, not because of him, but because of the delicious food. Wuyutan was a monk, cultivating his body and mind, and was not interested in the things of the world. He walked slowly, his eyes fell on Shen Shuwei, and his indifferent eyes immediately became soft. Wang Jingyuan did not lie to her. After walking for about 10 minutes, they came to the snack street. The reason why it was called the snack street was that it was all for sale, including cakes and hot food. When Shen Shuwei saw the delicious food, even if her legs were a little sore, it could not stop her determination to eat delicious food. She took the brunt of it and went to find the delicious food she loved. Lin Xian looked at her excited expression, which was quite different from before she came out. He thought she would be tired and want to rest after a short while. Now it seems that he was overthinking. Wang Leiwen is not that interested in food. In her opinion, eating should be in a restaurant instead of a snack street. She went shopping mainly to date Lin Xian and visit rouge, gouache, or clothing stores, not to sit and eat with ordinary nobles in the snack street. She turned around and suggested, "Mr. Lin, how about we go to Lefa restaurant for dinner? The food and wine there are good." Lin Xian said warmly, "I think it's pretty good here." With that said, he stepped forward to follow Shen Shuwei. He looked at Wang Jingyuan and Wu Tan who had already followed. The purpose of these two people was too obvious. Wang Leiwen wanted to say something else, but she saw Lin Xian leaving. Only then did she realize that the three of them had followed Dr. Shen. She stamped her feet angrily and followed reluctantly. Shen Shu looked left and right slightly. The food in each place was different, but because of ancient times, the preparation was not as sophisticated as modern times, but it was good to eat it. She picked a noodle dish that looked very appetizing. It was spicy and should taste good. "I'll eat this, you can do whatever you want," she said without looking back, then got into the stall and found an empty table to sit down. As soon as I finished ordering the pasta, I saw people sitting down one after another in front of me. Wu Tan, Wang Jingyuan, and then Xiao Jinyan, who arrived belatedly. She asked the three people in front of her doubtfully, "Do you also eat noodles?" The three people almost nodded at the same time, "Yeah." Shen Chu turned slightly and ordered the landlady to add 3 more bowls of noodles. When the steaming noodles were served, Shen Chuwei couldn't wait to pick up her chopsticks and start eating. When Wang Leiwen arrived, she saw that Dr. Shen had already eaten. She looked disgusted. "What's so good about noodles?" Wang Jingyuan looked at Shen Chuwei eating noodles and felt a little hungry. He turned his head and looked at his sister. "Don't you want to eat noodles?" Wang Leiwen still looked disgusted. "I don't want to eat it." At this time, the landlady brought 3 bowls of steaming noodles and placed them in front of the 3 of them. Lin Xian picked up the chopsticks and started eating slowly. The noodles are vegetarian and Wu Tan can eat them. He picked up the chopsticks slowly and slowly. He doesn't like hot food, so he is used to blowing on them a few times before putting them into his mouth. Wang Jingyuan has been ill for a long time and hasn't gone out for a long time, let alone the noodles on the street. He doesn't remember how long he hasn't eaten. Seeing the steaming noodles, he wanted to eat them. There were 5 people at a table, and 4 of them were eating noodles. Only Wang Leiwen didn't eat, so he just sat there and watched the 4 of them eat. "I was unhappy to begin with, and now I am even more unhappy." While I was unhappy, I also felt a little inexplicably embarrassed. After Shen Chuwei finished a bowl of noodles, he took a sip of tea from the side with satisfaction. The noodles here were different from those in Daxia. They seemed to be made of whole grains and tasted okay. There is spicy in the noodles. Shen Chuwei likes spicy food and doesn't think it's a problem, but the 3 people across from him don't like spicy food. After just 2 bites, the noodles are overly spicy. So Shen Chuwei finished the bowl of noodles, and the 3 of them only took 3 bites. Their lips were red and they drank water wildly. While the 3 of them were enduring the spicy noodles and eating noodles, Shen Chuwei went to the stall next door and bought delicious food, including scones and sweet soup. "I bought some more, do you want to eat them?" Lin Xian couldn't stand it anymore. When he saw Shen Chuwei buying hot snacks, he said, "I'll try it." As he spoke, he lifted one of the bowls of soup to his lips and took a sip. He found that it was sweet, so he drank a few more sips. Wu Tan had been eating light vegetarian meals and was used to it. Suddenly he ate spicy food. He couldn't stand it for a while, so he gave up. He saw Lin Xian drinking sugar and it seemed good, so he also asked for a bowl of soup. Not to mention Wang Jingyuan, he had been ill for a long time and couldn't eat spicy food. Seeing that they all gave up, he didn't insist and also asked for a bowl of sweet soup. Wang Leiwen didn't like sweet soup, so naturally she wouldn't eat it, but it was very embarrassing for her to sit there alone. When they came out of the snack street, everyone was full except Wang Leiwen. Shen Chuwei felt like sleeping after eating and drinking, and suggested, "Let's go back." Wang Jingyuan smiled and nodded, "Okay, I've been out for a while, it's time to go back." Wang Leiwen was still hungry at this moment, and she wanted to go to a restaurant for dinner. Seeing that they were going back, just as she wanted, she could go shopping with Mr. Lin alone. "Then you go back, Mr. Lin, and I will go shopping again." Of course, Shen Chuwei would not let Xiao Jinyan and Wang Leiwen be alone together. As a doctor, he could come up with reasons at his fingertips. How can that be done? He walked so much today, it's time to rest, otherwise his legs will hurt and he won't be able to sleep at night. When Wang Leiwen heard this, she looked at Lin Xian's legs. She raised her head and looked at him doubtfully, "Mr. Lin, do you feel pain in your legs?" Lin Xian nodded cooperatively, I walked for a long time today and I really need to rest. Wang Jingyuan also said, Sister, Mr. Lin has just recovered from his injury, and his leg has been so seriously injured. You must not be willful. Wang Leiwen was a little reluctant, but for the sake of Lin Xian's legs, she had no choice but to agree. Shen Shuwei ate and drank enough, and when he went back, he had a smile on his face. Wang Leiwen, on the other hand, looked unhappy, partly because he was hungry. After staying in the imperial city for another 3 days, when Wang Leiwen came to see Lin Xian, he bid her farewell. Thank you Princess Leiwen for taking care of her during this time. I plan to go back early tomorrow morning. Good night Spicy. Asking for votes. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 535. Wang Leiwen came today to take Lin Xian out for fun, so she was a little surprised when she heard him say goodbye. Didn't you say you should stay a little longer? Wouldn't it be too hasty to leave tomorrow? Lin Xian said warmly, I have been harassing you for many days. I am ready to go home tomorrow. It has been a long time since I went back. Wang Leiwen knew that he had decided to leave, but she just didn't want him to leave. She raised her eyes and looked at the handsome man in front of her. Then you can't wait any longer? Tomorrow is my birthday. After my birthday, can you leave again? This, Lin Xian was a little embarrassed. He had already agreed with Shen Shuwei that he would leave tomorrow, and Shen Shuwei would leave the city today, then meet up outside the city and leave. When Wang Leiwen saw Lin Xian's hesitation, she continued, Mr. Lin, you have been out for so long anyway, and it doesn't take more than 1 day. The day after tomorrow, can I personally take you out of the city? Faced with the Savior's request, which was not excessive, Lin Xian thought for a while and then nodded in agreement, okay. Wang Leiwen was so happy when he saw him nodding in agreement. It's the same birthday every year, it's not interesting. This year, with you by my side, it feels different. Lin Xiandao, it's just one more person to accompany you on your birthday. That's different. Tomorrow is my 16th birthday, which is of great significance. Wang Leiwen has already begun to look forward to tomorrow's birthday. She can choose a consort. Lin Xian looked at Wang Leiwen's happy face. For a princess like her who had been pampered since she was a child, her birthday would definitely not be as lively as usual. Here, Shen Shuwei has already explained Wang Jingyuan's condition to Wang Jingyu and left some medicine. After Shen Chu's microdiagnosis and treatment, Wang Jingyuan did recover well, and Wang Jingyuan was there to help talk. Wang Jingyu was not suspicious and asked someone to collect the reward. You deserve these bounties. Shen Shuwei looked at the 10,000 gold in front of her. Although it was different from Daxia's gold, it was still a large amount of money. She didn't show any pretense and pocketed it all. After coming out of Wang Jingyu's place, Shen Chu walked toward the guest room happily. Wang Jingyuan looked at her happy face. He could tell that she was not happy because of the 10,000 bounty. If you leave today, why don't you stay one more day? No. Shen Chu slightly raised his head and looked at Wang Jingyuan, thought for a moment and said, maybe we will have a chance to meet again in the future. Wang Jingyuan asked, really? Of course, your disease cannot be eradicated, and the medicine is only enough for half a year, unless you can find someone who can cure you. Shen Shuwei told the truth. Although his condition is now stable, she herself cannot guarantee that his condition will last forever. Stabilize. When Wang Jingyuan heard this, he immediately understood the meaning of her words. He smiled and said, I also want to go to Daxia to visit you when I have time. I'll meet you on the way. Shen Shuwei naturally welcomed him, I can treat you to some tea fruit. Wang Jingyuan even raised his eyebrows and smiled, then it's settled. Then I'm leaving. After Shen Shuwei said goodbye to him, she walked cheerfully toward the guest room. Before he had taken 2 steps, he was stopped by Wang Jingyuan again, are you and Lin Xian planning to return to Daxia together? A few days ago, Wang Jingyuan learned that Shen Shuwei was leaving with Lin Xian, and Shen Shuwei also believed that Lin Xian was Xiao Jinyan. Shen Shuwei stopped and looked back at Wang Jingyuan with some hesitation. I'm not going back to Daxia, I'm going to Nanzhao. Wang Jingyuan looked at her in surprise when he heard this. Why are you going to Nanzhao Kingdom? Then he seemed to have thought of something and asked, did you go to Nanzhao Kingdom because of your suspected identity? Shen Chu shook his head slightly. Anyway, I have something important to go to Nanzhao. Wang Jingyuan's eyes flashed with disappointment. I thought you doubted your identity and went to Nanzhao Kingdom to find answers and the truth. Shen Shuwei immediately understood the meaning of his words. Do you want to know about Feng Wu? I'm going this time. If there is any news about her, how about I send you a letter later? Wang Jingyuan smiled and nodded. Okay. Shen Shuwei walked back to the guest room with cheerful steps, and went to Xiao Jinyan's guest room. As soon as he entered, he saw Xiao Jinyan sitting at the table and drinking tea leisurely. Even if he lost his memory, his nobility could not be erased. Every gesture and gesture showed his noble status. She also discovered that since Xiao Jinyan couldn't remember, her life had been very leisurely. She didn't have to help the emperor review memorials, and there were no endless government affairs to deal with. Keep a regular schedule every day, no need to stay up late. Looking at his glossy black hair, if he remembered it and returned to Daxia and continued to stay up all night, would he be able to keep his head full of black hair? Forgive her for all her vulgar ideas. But in those days, young and middle-aged people were under great pressure, staying up late, and hair loss were the most common problems that could not be solved. A bald Xiao Jinyan suddenly appeared in her mind. The scene was so funny that she couldn't help but laugh out loud. Lin Xian was drinking tea when he saw Shen Shuwei coming but did not come in. She stood at the door and looked at him with a silly smile. Why are you standing at the door and giggling? Nothing. Shen Chu smiled slightly and walked in, sat down in front of him, picked up the teapot and poured himself a cup of tea. I have made it clear to Wang Jingyu that we can leave here this afternoon. Lin Xian said, I'm afraid I won't be able to leave tomorrow. Shen Shuwei paused while drinking tea, then raised his eyes to look at him with confusion. Why? Aren't you in a hurry to go to Nanzhao Kingdom? Why don't you leave again? Lin Xian said, it's not that I won't leave, it's that I won't be able to leave tomorrow, but the day after tomorrow. Shen Shuwei asked, why? Lin Xian explained, tomorrow is Princess Leun's birthday, she wants me to stay and celebrate her birthday. What a coincidence. Shen Shuwei was a little unhappy. She asked you to stay and you stayed. When did you become so obedient? Lin Xian said, she is my lifesaver, this request is not excessive, it's just one day later. Yes, yes, you make sense. Shen Shuwei raised the teacup and drank several sips, feeling a little depressed. Xiao Jinyan, who lost his memory, made her very worried. Lin Xian tilted his head slightly and saw her angry look. Are you angry? You're asking even though you know the answer. Shen Shuwei couldn't help but roll her eyes at him, and glanced at the plate on the table and found it empty. Hey, why are the pastries gone? She turned her head to look at Xiao Jinyan. Are you hungry? Lin Xian looked at the green plate on the table. Shen Shuwei made 2 pastries, mung bean cake and glutinous rice bean paste cake, but Wang Leiwen came just now, tasted one and said it was delicious, so he ate all of them. He looked at Shen Shuwei. If he told the truth, would she be angry? I'm not hungry. That's right, how can you be hungry after eating so many pastries? I'm hungry. Shen Shuwei shouted to the door. Qin Xiao, the steamed pork with rice flour should be ready, bring it over. Qin Xiao heard this and turned to get the steamed pork with rice flour. Lin Xian had eaten steamed pork with rice flour before, and it tasted good. He also wanted to eat some. Have you cooked? Shen Shuwei shook her head. I originally planned to eat it at lunch, but now I'm hungry, so I'll eat a little in advance to fill my stomach. Lin Xian nodded, okay. Not long after, Qin Xiao brought the steamed pork with rice flour. After opening the lid, the fragrance was overflowing. Qin Xiao also prepared 2 small bowls and 2 pairs of chopsticks, in addition to spare chopsticks. Shen Shuwei picked up the bowl and plate with one hand, and took the chopsticks with the other hand. She couldn't wait to pick up the meat and put it on the plate. While the meat was cooling, she said, "Then I won't leave today." Lin Xian said in a gentle voice, "Well, it's the same if I leave tomorrow." "I won't leave tomorrow either," Shen Shuwei said and put the meat into her mouth. The pork belly used for steamed pork with rice flour was evenly fat and lean, and it was not greasy to eat. Lin Xian asked, "Do you want to go with me?" Shen Shuwei asked while eating meat, "Is it not possible?" Lin Xian smiled, "Whatever you want." Shen Shuwei lowered her head and continued to eat the steamed pork with rice flour with satisfaction. Lin Xian saw it and wanted to eat it too. He picked up the chopsticks and put a piece on the plate, and ate it slowly. At night, Shen Shuwei lay on the bed and looked at Xiao Jinyan. Her eyes fell on his chest. After thinking for a while, she reached her hand through the collar. As soon as she touched the strong chest, she was grabbed by a hand. She raised her head and bumped into a pair of shining phoenix eyes. "What's wrong?" Lin Xian looked at her with a smile, "You don't want to get up tomorrow." "I just want to see how your scar is." Lin Xian let go of her hand after hearing this, supported himself on the bed and sat up straight, untied his belt with his slender fingers, and then slowly opened his collar to reveal his white chest. Due to the lack of daily exercise during the recovery period, his chest muscles were obviously not as strong as before. Xiao Jinyan was born abstinent, and with his recent recovery from a serious injury, his careless behavior was very tempting. Shen Shuwei secretly sighed, Xiao Jinyan was not like this before. Her eyes fell on his chest, the scar was slightly lighter, but still very obvious. After Shen Shuwei finished reading, she took the initiative to close her collar and then tied her belt. Lin Xian lowered his eyes and looked at her skilled movements, as if she did it often. She had just finished bathing and exuded a refreshing fragrance, which was very nice. After Shen Shuwei tied her belt, she stretched out her arms to hug his neck and stared at him without blinking. "Jinyan, after we leave here, let's go back and report that we are safe, okay?" Lin Xian didn't expect that she would take the initiative to hug him. They were close to each other, and they couldn't avoid close contact. His breathing stagnated and his mouth was dry. "Where are you going back?" "Daxia." Shen Shuwei shook her head, "No, I'm going back to the military camp. Jinyu has replaced you on the battlefield. If he sees you, he will definitely be very happy." "Military camp?" It's no wonder that Lin Xian was so surprised, because Shen Shuwei had never mentioned the military camp from the beginning, and it was inevitable that he would be surprised when he suddenly mentioned it. Shen Shuwei said, "You led the troops to the battle, and then met a martial arts master. You were knocked off the cliff and disappeared. They looked for you for more than a month but couldn't find you." Lin Xian said, "They haven't found you for a month. Didn't you think you were dead?" "That's a cliff." Shen Shuwei explained, "There is a lake under the cliff, so there is still a chance of survival. Lord Lu also thought about it and said it would be easier for me to find you." The author's explanation added in the main text last night is free of charge, a total of 200 words, free of charge. The first main text of the previous chapter was 3,200 words, and the explanation was also 200 words, adding up to 3,400 words. I deleted the explanation of the previous chapter after midnight to avoid affecting the reading. VIP 5 and above only charge 3,000 words of reading coins, 12 reading coins, and the other 200 words are free. For VIPs below 5, the other 200 words will be charged 1 reading coin. Good evening. Please vote. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 536. Even if Master Lu didn't say anything, I still wanted to find you. I found you within 2 days of coming here. Master Lu is still very powerful. Lin Xian also thought she was very powerful. She saw him when she entered the imperial city for the first time. It must be Xue Tuan's fault that she has a very sensitive nose. What he was more curious about was Mr. Lu in her mouth. Who is Mr. Lu in your mouth? Can you even count this? Master Lu is the supervisor of Qin Tianjian. He can watch the stars and calculate fortunes. He can also do divination. He is very powerful. Shen Chuwei told Lin Xian about the blessings and wishes he had made. I asked for 2 kilograms of fish, and it was delivered to me by the imperial kitchen on the same day. Isn't it amazing? Lin Xian's mouth twitched violently. Pray for blessings and make a wish. Do you want 2 kilograms of fish? Shen Chuwei explained, well, I am a useless concubine who is not favored. The food sent in the imperial kitchen is either cabbage or leftover rice. I was too hungry for grilled fish at that time, so I made a wish to have grilled fish. Lin Xian looked in disbelief. It was a legend that a concubine who couldn't even eat fish could become a princess. But later, when he remembered Shen Chuwei's words, he felt sorry for her but also felt a little guilty. Because there was no prayer or wish at all, it was just to match her birth date. But she regards Lu Ziyan as a god. Shen Chuwei continued to persuade, Jin Yu looks very similar to you. You really don't want to meet him? Lin Xian thought for a while, but it was only a delay of 2 days, and then agreed, okay, I'll go meet that person who looks similar to me. Seeing that he had agreed, Shen Chuwei kissed his lips happily. I haven't seen Jin Yu for a few days, and I don't know if he has lost weight. He probably can't get used to the food in the military camp. He has been pampered since he was a child, so I'm afraid. It's going to take a lot of hardship, and then. Lin Xian frowned when he heard this. He is your brother-in-law, why do you care so much about him? Shen Chu said softly, don't you remember, although Jin Yu is my brother-in-law, she is also his sister-in-law. He is very nice and treats me like a sister. When you were not here, I was falsely accused of having an affair with your bodyguard when I was 4 months pregnant. He fought hard with the emperor to protect me. She was wrongly accused by Chang Liangyuan when she was pregnant, and Xiao Jinyu protected her sister-in-law domineeringly. She still remembers it vividly. When Lin Xian heard about the confrontation with the emperor, he felt that Xiao Jinyu was very courageous. Even if he was a prince, how could he dare to challenge the imperial power? Shen Chuwei was his sister-in-law, and it was easy for her to get distracted by him protecting her like this. He protects you so much. Could it be that he likes you? Shen Chuwei paused after hearing the words, raised his head and looked at Xiao Jinyan, pinched his face and said, if you don't remember, you can't talk nonsense. Lin Xian snorted, if it's not the one you love, who has the guts to challenge the imperial power? Shen Chu said softly, the more you talk about it, the more outrageous it becomes. If your brother knew that his brother, the prince, was so suspicious of him, he would definitely be very sad. Lin Xiandao, then you know that the royal family is a place where family ties are important. For the sake of the throne, it is normal for brothers to kill each other. Shen Chu said softly, I know, but you two brothers have a good relationship. The reason why he protects me so much is mostly because of you. He said that the prince brother went to the battlefield to kill the enemy, and he, as the younger brother, has the responsibility to protect the prince brother. His wife and children. Besides, your brother is the most favored among all the princes. He dared to act so boldly because the emperor pampered him, but he might have been a little scared at the time. Then, she added, your brother has a woman he likes, and she is already married. Lin Xian was startled when he heard this. He didn't expect that the relationship between the princes could be as good as this. Wait, he discovered something more important. You said you're pregnant. Shen Chu nodded slightly. Yes, because you never remembered, I didn't mention it either. We also have two lovely babies, twins, who are almost 2 years old. Lin Xian received a lot of information today and couldn't digest it all at once, giving him a severe headache. He has a younger brother, a son, and a daughter? My darlings haven't seen you for half a year, and they must miss you very much. I haven't seen them for 2 months, and I miss them too. Once our affairs are finished, I will rush back without stopping. During this time, her attention was focused on Xiao Jinyan. This will mention 2 treasures, I don't think so. Shen Chuwei noticed something was wrong with Xiao Jinyan and frowned, as if he was feeling very uncomfortable. What's wrong with you? Are you thinking about it again? A few times before, when Xiao Jinyan had a severe headache, he remembered memories belonging to Xiao Jinyan. Although it was a bit strange, it was indeed Xiao Jinyan's memory. Lin Xian had heard Shen Chuwei talk about it several times before. He didn't pay attention to it at first, but he discovered the next 2 times that when he didn't know it, another person's memory would pop up in his mind, and that memory was Xiao Jinyan's. Seeing the worried look on her face, he said warmly, go to sleep. Okay. Shen Chuwei lay next to him, almost touching the pillow, and fell asleep. Asterisk. Today is Wang Leiwen's birthday, and the imperial city has begun to prepare for the birthday banquet in full swing. In fact, preparations were made 2 days ago, and the commotion is not as big as today. Wang Leiwen is the birthday boy today and is too busy to come see Lin Xian. Lin Xian could tell that Wang Leiwen had a crush on him, because it was so obvious that he couldn't even think about it. Even if Wang Leiwen didn't come to see him, he would feel at ease. After today, you can leave tomorrow without any extraneous matters. Today is Wang Leiwen's birthday, what do you think I should give him? I am penniless now and can't even give him a gift. It is said that a lifesaver is more important than heaven. He is not an ungrateful person, so he naturally has to prepare gifts. Leave it to me. Who made me your wife? Shen Chuwei said and ran out. After a while, she ran back in with a brocade box in her hand. Lin Xian asked in confusion, what is this? Shen Chuwei kept it a secret and took his hand and said, the birthday banquet is about to start, let's go. Lin Xian had to nod, okay. When they arrived, the place was already full of people. The birthday banquet here is different from that in Daxia. The birthday banquet is in the garden, and there is an archway to enter the garden. There are tables and chairs inside, and various delicacies and fruits are placed on the table, but most of them are talking. At a birthday banquet like Daxia, you must sit down in a proper manner. As a princess, Wang Leiwen has too many people to face and many social events. Shen Chuwei pulled Xiao Jinyan to a corner, sat down and started to eat the delicacies on the table. Lin Xian has been with her for so long, and he knows that she loves to eat. In front of her, except for major events, eating is the most important thing, and then sleeping. But she can distinguish the importance of things. Shen Chuwei picked up a piece of glutinous rice cake and handed it to his mouth, you should eat some too. After leaving here, you can't eat the delicacies here. Lin Xian lowered his head and took a bite. He felt that it was not as delicious as the cakes made by Shen Chuwei. It was not soft and sticky enough, and the sweetness was a bit too much. Shen Chuwei stuffed the rest into her mouth and glanced at Wang Leiwen not far away. There were many young talents around her, and they all liked her. With so many young talents, it would be better not to have any ideas about Xiao Jinyan. Wang Jingyuan searched for a long time, and finally saw Shen Chuwei and Lin Xian in the corner. As soon as he came over, he saw them eating glutinous rice cakes together. He stopped in his tracks, afraid of disturbing a warm scene. This scene reminded him of the time when Feng Guiyu and Xiao Jinyan were often together in Nanzhao Kingdom. Feng Guiyu would often stuff food for Xiao Jinyan, and Xiao Jinyan would accept it one by one. He collected his thoughts and continued to walk over. Dr. Shen. Shen Shuwei raised her head from the food and saw Wang Jingyuan. She smiled and greeted, "Your sister is having a birthday, aren't you going to accompany her?" Wang Jingyuan smiled and said, "It's like this every year. It doesn't matter if you accompany her less." Shen Shuwei glanced and didn't see Wu Tan, so she asked him, "Where is Wu Tan? Why didn't he come?" Wang Jingyuan explained, "He is a monk, so he didn't come. No wonder I didn't see him." Being a monk is too painful. After saying that, he picked up a piece of barbecue with chopsticks and put it into his mouth. He was secretly glad that he was not in a nunnery when he came here, otherwise there would be no fun at all. Shen Shuwei taught the cook to make barbecue. Since they started to show off the cooking skills they had learned recently, she didn't have to cook by herself and could eat the food she wanted. Lin Xian looked up and looked at Wang Jingyuan indifferently. As a man, he had different ideas about Shen Shuwei. Wang Jingyuan looked up, and their eyes met. Neither of them had the intention of retreating. At this time, Wang Leiwen ran over happily, "Mr. Lin, come with me." Lin Xian's eyes flashed with doubt, "What?" Wang Leiwen reached out to hold his arm. Shen Shuwei saw it, and reached out to grab Xiao Jinyan's sleeve. She was strong and pulled him over with force. She patted his sleeve and said, "Your clothes are dirty." "Really?" Lin Xian looked down at his sleeves. Although it was a moon-white dress, it was night now, and it was not visible if it was dirty. He looked up at Shen Shuwei, only to see her grinning at him. She looked small, but she was quite strong. Wang Leiwen was disappointed and a little dissatisfied. When she was about to reach out to pull Lin Xian, Wang Jingyuan pulled her over and whispered, "Sister, as a princess, you are pulling and tugging in public, how can you be so rude?" Wang Leiwen couldn't stand this and immediately retorted, "Brother, are you too nosy? How could I pull and tug?" Wang Jingyuan said, "Then you should speak properly. Why are you pulling someone's arm? You are a princess, and there are so many people present. Don't be so willful." Wang Leiwen's face changed with anger, "Today is my birthday, can't you ignore me?" Lin Xian took out the gift prepared by Shen Shuwei from behind and handed it to Wang Leiwen. "Leiwen, this is a birthday gift for you." Wang Leiwen heard the birthday gift, and her unhappiness just now was swept away. She happily took it and looked down at the exquisite gift box in her hand. It looked very beautiful. "I wonder what gift Lin Xian gave?" I explained again, the charging standard is 5 reading coins per 1,000 words. Now the chapter word range is 3,000 words, sometimes 4,000 words, so don't say it's expensive. The author has no right to change the price, but can control the word count. Babies, please give me monthly votes and recommendation votes. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Iyun Si. Chapter 537. Lin Xian stared at the gift box in her hand. It looked very beautiful. He didn't know what the gifts were inside. He glanced sideways at Shen Shuwei and saw that she was turning to pick up the sweet cake on the table. The sweet cake was only the size of a finger. After picking it up, just pop it into your mouth. Wang Leiwen was very curious about what gift Lin Xian would give her, and couldn't wait to open the gift box in front of Lin Xian. In the gift box, there is a pair of jade bracelets, with a ruby inlaid on them. The style is somewhat different from that of the Xin Miao people, but it is very luxurious and beautiful. Lin Xian just raised his eyes and saw the gift inside. He knew it was worth a lot at a glance. No wonder Shen Shuwei told him not to worry on the way here, as he would definitely not lose face. He lowered his eyes and glanced at Shen Shui, only to see that she was puffing out her cheeks, and he could tell that she was eating silently again. Shen Shui noticed that he was looking over and raised her eyebrows at him. Wang Leiwen raised her head and looked at Lin Xian happily. "Mr. Lin, I like the gift you gave me very much." Lin Xian said, "As long as you like it, I'll put it on and take a look." Wang Leiwen placed the gift box on the table, took out the jade bracelet from the brocade robe, and carefully put it on his wrist, for fear of accidentally dropping it. Her wrists are slender, and the jade bracelet fits just right on her wrist. After Wang Leiwen put on the jade bracelet, she happily raised it to Lin Xian. "Master Lin, does it look good?" Lin Xian looked at the jade bracelets. Shen Shui had a good eye. Although the jade bracelets were visible, they still looked grand. He nodded, "Yeah." Wang Leiwen was extremely happy. At this time, the maid came over and said, "Princess, the patriarch asked you to come over." "Okay." Wang Leiwen raised his eyes and glanced at Lin Xian, then followed the maid and left. The patriarch saw his precious daughter coming, beckoned her to stand next to him, and announced in front of everyone, "Today is Princess Leun's 16th birthday. She has reached the marriageable age, and she has chosen a young talent to be her consort." As soon as the clan leader finished speaking, things started boiling down below. Many young talents liked Wang Leiwen and were waiting for this day. When he became the consort, his status would reach a higher level, and he would be more noble than the nobles. The patriarch smiled and looked at his precious daughter. "Leun, which of these young talents do you like?" Wang Leiwen just glanced at the so-called young talent, and said shyly, "My daughter has been chosen." The patriarch heard this and was a little curious about his daughter's eyes. Who would she look at? "Tell me and let's see, which master is he from?" Wang Leiwen looked at Lin Xian in the corner. Even if he was standing in the corner, his noble temperament would stand out from the crowd. His face is so handsome that you can't take your eyes away from him once you take a look at it. "The person I like is Mr. Lin." Lin Xian. The young talents below all looked puzzled when they heard this, because they had never heard of this person. Who is Mr. Lin? Who is the noble son of which family? I've never heard of anyone named Lin among the nobles. Lin Xian, who was named, was also confused. How could he directly say that he was a prince in public? Shen Chu was stunned for a moment. Although he guessed that Wang Leiwen had some serious thoughts about Xiao Jinyan, he didn't expect that she would name her son-in-law in public. She raised her head to look at Xiao Jinyan and said quietly, "Are all princesses so confident?" This is no less than a confession in public. If the feelings of both parties are not confirmed, this method of confession has only two results. Either the other party agrees, and everyone is happy, or be rejected and embarrassed on the spot. Lin Xian replied, "I don't know." Wang Leiwen happily walked down from the stage. The crowd automatically parted away, and she walked towards the side from the crowd with a smile on her face. Lin Xian looked at Wang Leiwen walking towards him, and roughly guessed what she was going to do. He stood upright, and his hand was suddenly held by a warm hand. He turned his head and saw Shen Shui beside him. "Who would have thought that this would happen on the last day of my stay here?" Wang Leiwen slowly came to Lin Xian. She was dressed particularly gorgeously and beautifully today. Everyone present followed Wang Leiwen's figure and saw Lin Xian in front of her. They vaguely guessed that he was Lin Xian, the son of Lin that Leun was interested in. This person looks so strange, he doesn't look like a Miao person. Just by looking at the clothes he's wearing, you can tell he's not from here. Why did Princess Leun fall in love with an outsider? Wang Leiwen took out her belongings. The bag she had been wearing since she was a child had beautiful patterns embroidered on it and a red tassel on the bottom. "Master Lin, I want you to be my husband." Lin Xian took a look at the items in her hand. Every time he and Wang Leiwen came here these days, he saw her carrying them with her. Adding those words, it was probably a token of love. He didn't want to solve this matter in public, but Wang Leiwen didn't give him this chance. Princess Leiwen, you are of noble status and have a natural beauty, but I already have a sweetheart. Thank you for your kindness. As soon as Lin Xian finished speaking, there was a sound of surprise from all around. How many people wanted to marry Princess Leun, but he actually refused. He didn't take Princess Leun seriously at all. That's it, I don't know what's wrong, but I dare to reject Princess Leun. Wang Leiwen was stunned when she heard that he had a sweetheart, because she didn't expect that he had a sweetheart, but it was right to think about it. How could a handsome man like Lin Xian not be liked by anyone? I'm afraid the people who like him will queue up to the other side of the square. A man can have 3 wives and 4 concubines. I don't mind if you take concubines. Lin Xian paused after hearing this. If it were someone else, he could refuse directly, but facing his savior, he couldn't remain silent. I promised her that I would not take a concubine. When Wang Leiwen came over, Shen Shuwei stopped eating and kept staring at Xiao Jinyan, wanting to see his reaction. But now it seems that she is quite satisfied with Xiao Jinyan's reaction. Fortunately, she was vaccinated in advance, otherwise it would be really difficult to be labeled as a lifesaver. Wang Leiwen asked in disbelief, "You got married?" Lin Xian nodded, "Yeah." Wang Leiwen thought that she had made such a big concession at her own expense, but in the end, he didn't take a concubine for another woman? How could she be willing to accept this? Even if her sister was willful and thoughtless, she was still her sister after all. Wang Jingyuan pulled her into his arms. "You always do things like this, without considering the consequences." Wang Leiwen had never met a man who could make her so moved. Even though he already had a wife, she was still very unwilling. "Who is your wife? I want to meet her." Lin Xian glanced at Shen Shuwei. It was obvious that it was very rational to suddenly reveal his feelings at this time. He retracted his gaze and looked at Wang Leiwen and said, "She is in Daxia." Wang Jingyuan angrily scolded, "Aren't you tired of making trouble yet?" The clan leader also came from the crowd and glanced at Lin Xian. He knew that this young man was rescued by his daughter, but he didn't expect that his daughter would leave so many young talents and choose an outsider. "Leiwen, stop making trouble." Wang Leiwen was unwilling, but he couldn't say anything else. The originally lively birthday banquet was a little awkward because of the selection of a son-in-law. When they returned to the guest room, they saw Wu Tan standing under the tree, as if waiting for them. She took the initiative to ask, "Master Wu Tan, is there something wrong with you?" Lin Xian saw Wu Tan's eyes darken. Wu Tan took 2 steps forward and asked in a gentle voice, "Well, are you going back to Daxia or Nanzao?" Shen Shuwei said, "Going to Nanzao, what's wrong?" Wu Tan said, "Nothing, I plan to go to Nanzao." "Since you are going to, I want to go with you, okay?" "I have no problem." Shen Shuwei seemed to have thought of something, and she asked curiously, "Is your hometown in Nanzao?" Lin Xian frowned unhappily when he saw that she agreed so easily. "No, we are not going there for fun." Wu Tan, instead of looking at Lin Xian, he nodded to Shen Shuwei, "Yeah." Shen Shuwei tugged at Xiao Jinyan's sleeve. "Wu Tan's hometown is in Nanzao country. We are unfamiliar with the place. It will save a lot of trouble to have him as a guide." Wu Tan chuckled, "Nanzao country, I am very familiar with it." Shen Shuwei tugged at his sleeve again. "You see, with an acquaintance leading the way, not only can you save trouble, but also save time." Shen Shuwei actually wanted to solve Xiao Jinyan's matter quickly, then return to Daxia, and then reunite with the family. Lin Xian heard this, glanced at Wu Tan, and could only reluctantly agree. After making an appointment with Wu Tan, the two returned to the guest room. Lin Xian secretly breathed a sigh of relief. He picked up the teapot and poured himself a cup of tea. Seeing Shen Shuwei, he handed it to her first. "You have eaten so much meat, drink some tea to relieve the greasiness. Shen Shuwei took the teacup and handed it to her mouth and drank a few sips. Lin Xian took a few sips of tea from the teacup, then looked up at Shen Shuwei in front of him. She kept drinking tea with her head down, obviously very thirsty. Shen Shuwei had drunk enough, so she put down the teacup, her tone full of excitement, because she was leaving this place. Let's rest early tonight and leave early tomorrow morning. I asked Qin Xiao to arrange the horses in advance. Lin Xian nodded, yeah. The two of them rested early. At this time, the lights were still on in Wang Leiwen's boudoir, and there was a sound of smashing things inside. Princess, calm down, the maid shivered in fear and advised carefully. Wang Leiwen's beautiful face became a little hideous because of unwillingness. The hot tea on the table was swept to the ground by her, and the boiling tea splashed on the maid's embroidered shoes. All of you get out. Yes, yes. The maid was frightened and pale, and hurriedly retreated. After Wang Leiwen finished shouting, she still couldn't calm down. She sat at the table and thought that Lin Xian would leave tomorrow. She was not only unwilling, but also reluctant. She suddenly thought of the note, saying that Lin Xian would not come back after leaving. It turned out that he was referring to the fact that he had married. In the morning of this day, Shen Shuwei and Lin Xian woke up early. In fact, they didn't greet each other. Lin Xian came here empty-handed and left empty-handed. No, when he left, there was one more person beside him, Shen Shuwei. Most of Shen Shuwei's things were in the space, so she just carried the bag on her back. At the entrance of the Imperial City Gate, there was a carriage to send them out. Wang Jingyuan and Wang Leiwen are here. Good afternoon. Please support with recommendation votes and monthly tickets. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 538. Shen Shuwei, Xiao Jinyan, and Wu Tan stood beside the carriage. Although she was a little high profile when she left, Shen Shuwei was too excited to care about it at this time, because she finally coaxed Xiao Jinyan to the military camp. Returning to Daxia is just around the corner. Even Xiao Jinyan beside her noticed Shen Shuwei's excitement. Since getting up in the morning, the smile on her face has never disappeared, although there is always a faint smile on the corner of her mouth. But when he saw Wu Tan beside Shen Shuwei, his eyes darkened. Wang Jingyuan's eyes fell on Shen Shuwei, but he said to Shen Shuwei and Wu Tan, after today's farewell, I don't know when we will see each other again. Take care of yourself. Shen Shuwei smiled and said goodbye. Well, you take care of yourself too. Wu Tan clasped his hands together and said softly, take care of yourself. Wang Jingyuan chuckled, I will. Shen Shuwei said goodbye and got on the carriage happily. Before she got in, she heard someone shouting behind her. Dr. Shen, wait. Shen Shuwei paused and looked back, and saw two cooks coming over here, a man and a woman. Both of them were about 30 years old, and their faces were greasy because they stayed in the kitchen all year round. Do you have anything to do? The male cook held a few oil paper bags in front of Shen Shuwei with both hands, and smiled very sincerely. Dr. Shen, these are the meals and pastries we made early in the morning. We learned them from you. You can eat them on the road. During this period, I have learned a lot of cooking skills from you. The clan leaders praised our cooking skills for improvement and increased our monthly salary. These are all the credit of Dr. Shen, the female cook also echoed. Shen Shuwei was so greedy when she heard about meals and pastries. It was a very enjoyable thing to eat freshly cooked food on the road. Then I won't be polite. Dr. Shen, you're welcome, the male cook said happily. Shen Shuwei was not hypocritical. She took the oil paper bags from the male cook, waved goodbye and got into the carriage without looking back. Wu Tan retracted his gaze and followed him. When Wang Leiwen looked at Xiao Jinyan, she was still obsessed with love. From the first time she saw him, she thought he was really good looking, better looking than all the men. She was more unwilling in her heart. "Mr. Lin, I must see your wife. I want to see if she looks like a fairy and can make you swear not to take a concubine." Xiao Jinyan didn't know what to say. In the end, she only said a short sentence, "Princess Leiwen, I will remember your life-saving grace in my heart. Take care." After that, she turned around and got on the carriage. When Wang Leiwen saw him getting on the carriage and the curtain was about to close, she shouted unwillingly, "You will definitely regret not choosing me." Xiao Jinyan got into the carriage without looking back and closed the curtain. Wang Jingyuan held his sister's shoulders and advised, "Sister, a gentleman does not take away what others like, and also helps others to be beautiful. Why are you like this?" Wang Leiwen retorted dissatisfiedly, "I am not a gentleman. Why can't I take away what I like? Why do I have to make others sad?" Wang Jingyuan saw that his sister was so stubborn and felt helpless. "Haven't you figured out what happened last night? It's obvious that she has no feelings for you. As a princess, why are you so petty? Are you my brother? You slander me in every sentence." Wang Leiwen looked at the carriage that had gone far away and ran away without looking back. Wang Jingyuan watched his sister leave and did not stop her. He had been spoiled since childhood. It was inevitable that he could not accept the rejection for the first time. He looked at the carriage that had gone far away, and he also wanted to go to Nanzhao Kingdom to take a look. At this time, the atmosphere in the carriage was a little wrong. Shen Shuwei had just opened the oil paper bag in her hand, and the fragrance was fragrant. She licked her lips greedily and looked up at Xiao Jinyan and Wu Tan. "Do you want to eat? It's still hot." Xiao Jinyan lowered his eyes to look at Shen Shuwei, and saw that in the oil paper bag in her hand, there were fried dough sticks, dumplings, and pan-fried buns. It seemed that the cooks had learned a lot of cooking skills from Shen Shuwei. "Try it." Shen Shuwei happily held it in front of him. Xiao Jinyan picked up a fried dough stick, put it in his mouth and took a bite. The taste was okay. Shen Shuwei held it in front of Wu Tan again. "Master Wu Tan, you should try it too. It's vegetarian, not meat." Wu Tan looked at the meal in the oil paper bag and didn't refuse. "Okay." He also picked up a fried dough stick, because he had eaten it many times, and it was made by Shen Shuwei himself, and it tasted good. Shen Shuwei picked up the pan-fried bun and stuffed it into his mouth. Half a bite, the meat was tender, the soup was rich, and it was delicious. Shen Shuwei ate almost all the way until the carriage stopped, indicating that they had arrived at the town of Jisaya. Shen Shuwei, Xiao Jinyan, and Wu Tan got off the carriage one after another. Qin Xiao had prepared 3 horses waiting not far away. When he saw the masters, he led the horses over. "Master." Because Wu Tan was not considered at the beginning, only 3 horses were prepared. Shen Shuwei took Xiao Jinyan's arm and said, "We will ride together." Qin Xiao and Wu Tan each have a horse. Xiao Jinyan would naturally not refuse, and the 3 horses could only be arranged in this way. "Okay." Xiao Jinyan grabbed the saddle and got on the horse neatly. After his leg injury healed, getting on the horse was just an easy task. After getting on the horse, he bent down and stretched out his arms to hug Shen Shuwei's waist, and then carried her on the horse. Shen Shuwei was naturally happy and relaxed without having to do anything herself. After getting on the horse, she sat in Xiao Jinyan's arms. She raised her head and looked at Xiao Jinyan. "It's been a long time since we rode together. This time we can get what we want." Xiao Jinyan wrapped his arms around her, held the reins tightly, and looked down at her. "How long?" Shen Chu said slightly, "It's been more than a year." "That's quite a long time." Xiao Jinyan pinched the horse's belly, and the horse started running wildly, following the path pointed by Shen Chu. Qin Xiao also mounted his horse and followed closely behind. Wu Tan looked at the 2 people who had already run away, and he quickly mounted his horse, not wanting to lag behind and catch up. After Xiao Jinyan was seriously injured, he was no longer so happy to ride a horse. Now he would gallop without any scruples, which felt good. Shen Shuwei was in a good mood. As long as she left the imperial city, she no longer had to worry. The small town of Jisei is far away from the military camp. We rode wildly on horseback and did not arrive at the military camp until late afternoon. Xiao Jinyan tightened the reins, and the horse neighed and stopped. At the gate of the military camp, the guarding soldiers saw the people on the horses and immediately stepped forward to salute, "See your Royal Highness, the Crown Princess." Then opened the gate of the military camp to let them go. Xiao Jinyan watched the soldiers salute him. Although he didn't remember it, he felt it was natural, as if he had experienced it since childhood. A group of people rode into the military camp. When she dismounted, Shen Shuwei's buttocks were already numb. Xiao Jinyan reached out and hugged her down. Her legs were as soft as stepping on cotton. Xiao Jinyan let go of her and fell down. He quickly put his arms around her waist to support her and asked in a low voice, "What's wrong?" Shen Chu slightly raised his head and looked at Xiao Jinyan, and said with a painful look on his face, I can't walk, my butt still hurts." Xiao Jinyan thought about her delicate body. Even he could not bear it after riding a horse for so long, let alone her as a woman. "I'll hold you." Shen Shuwei nodded happily, "Okay." When Xiao Jinyan bent down and picked her up, Shen Shuwei took the initiative to put her arms around his neck and went to his tent under Shen Shuwei's guidance. Wu Tan got off the horse and watched Lin Xian hug Shen Shuwei and leave. After a long time, he looked back and followed Qin Xiao to the tent where the guests lived. When the soldiers saw that His Royal Highness the Crown Prince was back, they showed expressions of surprise and shouted happily, "His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is back, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is back." When Xiao Jinyan led the troops in the war, he had a very good reputation. He was well strategized and would not let the soldiers die in vain. At the same time, rewards and punishments were clear and he was very popular among the soldiers. When the guard at the door saw the prince and princess, he was surprised and stepped forward to salute. "Your Highness, Crown Princess, you are finally back." Shen Chu asked slightly, "Where is King Yu?" "Prince Yu and General Su went out to fight today and won't be back for a while," the guard said. Shen Chu said slightly, "Then he will tell us as soon as he comes back." "I obey," the guard said. Xiao Jinyan then carried her into the camp. Although no one is staying these days, it is cleaned every day, so it is very clean. Xiao Jinyan glanced at the furnishings in the camp, including the bed, screen, and desk. He looked at the armor rack aside, but there was nothing there. Shen Shuwei saw him looking at his tent. "Does it feel a little familiar?" Xiao Jinyan shook his head, then carried Shen Shuwei to the bed and placed her on the bed. At this time, the guard came in and announced, "Your Highness, the generals want to see you." Xiao Jinyan frowned. How could he disturb his rest just after he came back? "Not see." "Huh," the guard looked confused. Shen Chu slightly raised his head to look at Xiao Jinyan, tugged on his sleeves, and explained, "You have been missing for so long, and they have been worried about your safety. Now that you are back, letting them see you can also stabilize the morale of the army." Xiao Jinyan hesitated for a while after hearing this. Maybe it was because he didn't remember that he was so resistant to anyone disturbing him at this time. "Let them in." Here, not long after the guards left, several generals strode in. The sound of armor scraping could be heard with every step they took, and their steps were sonorous and powerful. When the four generals saw Xiao Jinyan kneeling on one knee, they saluted in unison. "I will see you at last, Your Highness." Xiao Jinyan glanced at the four generals. Their skin was either dark or wheat-colored, and their faces were all unfamiliar. "Everyone, get up." The four generals stood up in response, all standing upright, looking at Xiao Jinyan with excitement, because Xiao Jinyan's ability and strength were obvious to all and they were willing to accept him. Before the generals could speak, Shen Shuwei took the lead and said, "His Highness has lost his memory. You don't need to report the battle situation for the time being." The four generals were still in a state of excitement when they heard such shocking news and did not react for a moment. But having said that, His Highness fell off a cliff and miraculously survived, which is already a happy event. What is amnesia? After thinking about this, the four generals didn't say anything more, they just talked about the situation. Then exit. After resting for a quarter of an hour, the guard came in to report. "Your Highness, King Yu is back. Good night, Spicy. Please support me with monthly votes and recommendation votes. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading." Author, Gongzi Yun Si. Chapter 539. Xiao Jinyan heard Shen Shuwei mention King Yu and also heard some things about him, which made him curious. What kind of person is King Yu? Let him in. The guard was stunned for a moment. Seeing the guard standing still, Shen Shuwei urged, "What are you still standing there for? Let King Yu come in. He is probably impatient to wait." She still knew Xiao Jinyu well. Knowing that Xiao Jinyan was back, she would definitely be eager to see Xiao Jinyan. The fact that she didn't rush in showed that Xiao Jinyu's self-control had improved a lot. The guard hesitated. "King Yu, you are injured." When Shen Shuwei heard this, she couldn't help but start to worry. Is it serious? I'll go take a look. After saying that, he got off the bed and rested for a while. His legs were no longer numb, but his buttocks hurt a little and the inner thighs hurt a little from rubbing. When Xiao Jinyan saw her frown, he guessed that she was in pain. He strode forward to support her and comforted her. It is inevitable to get injured when fighting the enemy in battle. There should be a military doctor to treat his injury now, so you can rest. Shen Shuwei naturally knew that it was inevitable to get injured when he went into battle to kill the enemy, but he couldn't help but worry. We don't know how injured King Yu is yet. It's better to go and take a look first. Besides, I have medical skills and can help reduce his pain. Xiao Jinyan nodded helplessly after hearing this. I'll carry you. Shen Shuwei held his hand, a little embarrassed. It's not good in public, right? What do you care about them? Xiao Jinyan said, then he picked her up and strode outside the tent. Shen Chu slightly hugged Xiao Jinyan's neck. When she came in, many soldiers were staring at her, but she didn't feel embarrassed. But now, the soldiers who came back from the battlefield were stared at by many people, which was extremely embarrassing. She simply got into Xiao Jinyan's arms and covered her face. As long as she couldn't see her face, there was nothing to be embarrassed about. Xiao Jinyan lowered his eyes to see her actions, and then glanced at the many people staring at her. When the soldiers saw Xiao Jinyan's face, they all saluted in unison. Xiao Jinyan looked away and ignored him, and continued walking. At this time, Xiao Jinyu was sitting on the bed. His face was frighteningly pale, arrow feathers shot through the armor and stood straight on his chest, and bright red blood was all over his body. The two soldiers worked together to take off their armor and put it aside. The military doctor was preparing to sterilize and extract the arrows, when Xiao Jinyu heard the news that the crown prince had returned with the crown prince's brother, and pushed away the soldiers who were trying to take off his armor. We'll pull it out later. Let me go and see the prince brother first, and then you can pull it out for me after you finish. The military doctor said with a worried look, King Yu, the wound is bleeding, and the arrow feathers must be pulled out immediately to prevent the injury from getting worse. Because they had just returned from the battlefield, many injured soldiers needed medical treatment, so there was only one military doctor to treat Xiao Jinyu. Xiao Jinyu looked the military doctor up and down. You are only in your 40s, why are you so stubborn? How much time can I waste if I go and take a look? King Yu, this. The military doctor was speechless. Xiao Jinyu's camp is not far away, it will be there in a short walk. Just as he got closer, he heard Xiao Jinyu's breathless voice. Xiao Jinyan and Shen Chu looked at each other briefly and walked in. When he entered, there was only one military doctor treating Xiao Jinyu, but he was stopped by Xiao Jinyu, who had already gotten out of bed. Shen Chuwei looked at Xiao Jinyu's chest with arrow feathers sticking out. The blood was flowing down as if it was free. She felt super painful just looking at it. King Yu, what are you doing? Xiao Jinyu raised his head and saw Xiao Jinyan and Shen Chuwei, with a look of surprise on his face. Sister-in-law, brother prince. Xiao Jinyan looked at the young man in front of him. There were a few drops of blood on his cheeks, but he could still tell that his facial features were very similar to his own. The look in his eyes showed undisguised surprise. Shen Chu patted his shoulder slightly and said, "Put me down quickly." Yes, Xiao Jinyan slowly put her down and let her go after she stood firmly. Xiao Jinyu came over excitedly at this time and stood in front of Xiao Jinyan. He spread his arms and wanted to give the prince brother a warm hug. He forgot that he still had an arrow feather on his chest and rushed towards him, but was blocked by the arrow feather. It hurt. He bared his teeth. Pain. Xiao Jinyan didn't expect that he would suddenly want to hug her, so she didn't avoid it in time. When she saw his face turned pale in pain, she didn't know what to say. On the way here, he heard something about Xiao Jinyu. It was really not easy for a pampered prince to go into battle and kill the enemy on behalf of his brother. Xiao Jinyu tried to hug him again, but the broken arrow on his chest was still in the way. No matter which angle he changed, he couldn't hug him. He had no choice but to give up and raised his head to look at the prince brother whom he hadn't seen for half a year. He felt a lot thinner. "Brother prince, you miss me so much." Xiao Jinyan. Shen Chuwei watched Xiao Jinyu take the initiative. It was originally a very touching scene, but when he tried to hug Xiao Jinyan countless times, she couldn't help but laugh. Xiao Jinyu stared at the prince brother for a long time. Usually if the prince brother saw him injured, he would definitely be worried about him, and he would also praise him when he saw him go into battle to kill the enemy. As a result, the prince's brother just stared at him without saying a word. Xiao Jinyu endured the pain of the wound, turned around and asked Shen Chuwei in a low voice, "Sister-in-law, why do I feel that something is wrong with the prince brother?" Xiao Jinyan. Shen Chuwei looked up at Xiao Jinyan, only to see him frowning and sighing helplessly. He looked back at Xiao Jinyu and whispered, "At first, he treated me the same way." Xiao Jinyu widened his eyes in surprise. "Ah." When he reacted, he asked in surprise, "Has my brother changed his mind?" Although the two were talking in a low voice, Xiao Jinyan could hear it. Talking about him like this without paying attention to others, okay. Shen Chuwei looked at the broken arrow on his body and felt that the most important thing at the moment was to pull it out. Heal the wound first. The blood flows quickly, but it won't be so fast when you need to replenish it. I'll tell you in detail later. Xiao Jinyu looked down at the broken arrow in her chest, which was still bleeding, and nodded, "Okay, sister-in-law, you can pull it out for me. It's a good time to let the military doctor help. There are many casualties today." Xiao Jinyan refused directly, "No, there is a difference between men and women." Shen Chuwei pulled Xiao Jinyan's sleeve, "Your Highness, didn't you hear that there are many casualties today? There are not enough people, and besides, it's just pulling out the arrow." Xiao Jinyan lowered his eyes to look at her, "Doesn't that mean I have to take off my clothes?" Shen Chuwei answered very confidently, "You must take off your clothes to bandage." Xiao Jinyan refused coldly, "That won't work." Xiao Jinyu looked at the reaction of the prince brother and whispered to Shen Chuwei, "My brother is jealous, he doesn't look like he has changed his mind." Shen Shuwei glanced at Xiao Jinyan and whispered to Xiao Jinyu, because I found him, and reminded him, it's hard to say if I find him later. Xiao Jinyan. Shen Shuwei raised his head and looked at Xiao Jinyan, negotiating, Your Highness, I am only responsible for pulling out the arrow and treating the wound, you can help with the rest, is this okay? Xiao Jinyan nodded and agreed. Seeing that the prince brother agreed, Xiao Jinyu turned his head and ordered, Military doctor, you go to help first, you don't have to worry about this. The military doctor lowered his eyebrows and nodded and left. Xiao Jinyu sat obediently on the bed, waiting for the arrow to be pulled out. Shen Shuwei asked Qin Xiao to get the medicine box, and turned to Xiao Jinyu and said, I'll give you some anesthetics, and it won't hurt to pull out the arrow. Xiao Jinyu straightened her chest and said nonchalantly, No, sister-in-law will pull it out directly. I can still bear the pain. Shen Shuwei stared at the broken arrow for a long time. There were corners on both sides of the arrowhead, and it was easy to get stuck in the flesh when pulling it out. It would definitely be painful if it was not troublesome. If the arrowhead is stuck in the flesh, I still need to put the main forceps into the flesh and pull it out. This is several times more painful than pulling it out. Are you sure you don't want to use anesthesia? Xiao Jinyu didn't try to be stubborn after hearing this, then sister-in-law will still use anesthesia. It won't hurt if it doesn't hurt. Okay. Qin Xiao brought the medicine box and opened it. After being Shen Shuwei's assistant for so long, it was still useful. When Shen Shuwei pulled out the arrow, Xiao Jinyan helped on the side. The arrow was pulled out smoothly, but the arrowhead was stuck in the flesh and it took some time to pull it out. After Shen Shuwei finished these, she handed the rest to Xiao Jinyan and Qin Xiao. The medicine was ready. Xiao Jinyu looked up and kept looking at Xiao Jinyan in front of him. He lowered his eyebrows and his eyes were a little strange. Brother Prince, are you unhappy? Xiao Jinyan raised his eyes and glanced at Xiao Jinyu, and said two words lightly, No. Xiao Jinyu asked, Then why do you keep ignoring me? Xiao Jinyan took the new clothes and helped him put them on, and Xiao Jinyu also cooperated very well. After Xiao Jinyu changed his clothes, Shen Shuwei poured a cup of tea and came over, handing the cup to Xiao Jinyu, Drink some tea first. Okay, Xiao Jinyu was really thirsty at this time. He took the cup and handed it to his mouth. He drank a few sips of tea and couldn't help asking Shen Shuwei, What happened to my brother? Could he be stupid? The cliff is so high, it's really possible. Shen Shuwei raised his foot and kicked Xiao Jinyu. He really said anything. Xiao Jinyan turned his head to look at Shen Shuwei, questioning, Is this really my brother? Shen Shuwei said seriously, A real brother. Xiao Jinyan looked at Xiao Jinyu again, which was completely different from what he imagined. Shen Shuwei saw Xiao Jinyu's confused face, and she explained helplessly, Prince Yu, in fact, His Highness doesn't remember us, and his brain is not damaged. She tried her best to make Xiao Jinyan believe her and willing to go back to the barracks with her. Xiao Jinyu suddenly realized, and when he looked at Xiao Jinyan again, his eyes became different. He introduced very seriously, Brother Crown Prince, I am your brother, Xiao Jinyu, who is born of the same mother. We have a very good relationship, so you don't have to worry about me competing with you for the position of Crown Prince. Xiao Jinyan. Shen Shuwei. She swore that when Xiao Jinyu was serious, he was really serious, but sometimes he would be a little stupid. It's no wonder that Xiao Jinyu said this so seriously, because the intrigue among the princes, for the position of Crown Prince, can be said to be peaceful on the surface, but undercurrents are surging behind the scenes, and murderous intentions are heavy. Brother Crown Prince doesn't remember, he wants to make his position clear. Good afternoon. Babies, please support with monthly tickets and recommendation tickets. The prince longs for me every night after mastering thought reading. Author, Gongzi Iyun Si. Chapter 540. Chapter 540 He doesn't like discovering a secret. Xiao Jinyan thought he didn't believe him when he didn't speak, so he said solemnly, "Crown Prince, I can swear." Xiao Jinyan looked at Xiao Jinyu with a serious face, and thought of Shen Shuwei's words, and believed it a little. He said softly, "You are seriously injured, and resting first is the most important thing." Xiao Jinyu had just returned from the battlefield, and was seriously injured and lost too much blood. He was indeed very tired. If he hadn't been excited to learn that the Crown Prince had returned and forgot about the fatigue, he would have rested long ago. Okay. After Xiao Jinyu rested, Xiao Jinyan and Shen Shuwei returned to their tents. Shen Shuwei looked at Xiao Jinyan with a frown on his face. He might not be able to accept that he had a stupid brother for a while. "Your Highness, I'll have someone prepare some hot water. You can take a bath and rest first, okay?" Xiao Jinyan frowned again when she heard the address. "Why did you change the address?" Shen Shuwei didn't think there was anything wrong. She answered as a matter of course, "I've always called you that. Is there any problem?" Xiao Jinyan said, "Didn't you call me husband or Jinyan before?" Shen Shuwei said seriously, "That's because it's very common to call me husband outside. Jinyan can only be called in the boudoir. You are the prince, you can't call me casually. That's treasonous." Shen Shuwei realized that the tone of her words was very similar to the tone of Chengxi's words at the beginning. There's no way. Who made her live in ancient times? No matter how much Xiao Jinyan doted on her, she still had to follow certain rules. If someone caught her doing something wrong, they would make a fuss. Xiao Jinyan frowned even more tightly because he didn't like such an address. Shen Shuwei still had someone prepare hot water. After the hot water was ready, Shen Shuwei walked to Xiao Jinyan, hooked her hand around his belt, and looked up at him. "I'll undress you, okay?" Before Xiao Jinyan lost his memory, this sentence was very ordinary, and it was also a bit intimate and ambiguous. But Xiao Jinyan didn't remember it at the moment, so Shen Shuwei suddenly said to undress him so gently, hooking her hand around his belt with a bit of seduction. His eyes darkened a little. "Okay." Shen Shuwei hadn't undressed Xiao Jinyan for a long time, but this was what she was best at. With a faint smile, she untied his belt neatly, put it aside, and then untied his belt again. After taking off his shirt, she looked at Xiao Jinyan's lean body. Not only was there no fat on his waist, but his waist was particularly obvious, and his sexy mermaid line was highlighted a bit. These days of feeding, he didn't get fat. "I think it's going to Nanzhao. The journey is long. I'm afraid it's not easy to take care of my body. I can only wait until I return to Daxia to make up for it." Xiao Jinyan lowered his eyes to look at her and found that she was staring at him. He asked, "What are you looking at?" Shen Shuwei raised her head and teased, "Your Highness has lost a lot of weight. If you lose more weight, you will be skinny." Really? Xiao Jinyan lowered his eyes to look at his figure. He hadn't paid attention to it during this period. He had been looking forward to his injury being healed and being able to stand up. Now he saw that Shen Shuwei made sense. He was indeed thinner. "I will eat more in the future, and I will grow up." Ye Shen Shuwei took off his pants and threw them with his clothes. "Your Highness, go take a bath." Xiao Jinyan asked, "What about you?" Shen Shuwei said, "I'll go cook." "Your Highness is seriously injured and has not recovered. You still need to eat something good and suitable for your taste." Xiao Jinyan. He thought Shen Shuwei wanted to take a bath together. "I'll go cook." Shen Shuwei smiled and walked out happily. Xiao Jinyan turned and stepped into the bathtub. He still liked being outside for Shen Shuwei's attitude, but now he felt a little weird. Shen Shuwei's best skill was cooking. 5 dishes and 1 soup were enough for several people. The dishes were not famous dishes, but some home-cooked dishes, with a combination of meat and vegetables, which doubled the nutrition. She stewed chicken soup. The chicken was brought along by her, and it was fat and nutritious. After dinner was ready, Xiao Jinyan woke up after a nap. Shen Shuwei asked Qin Xiao to call Wu Tan to come for dinner, and then she went to call Xiao Jinyu. The two tents were very close, and they arrived in a short while. At this time, Xiao Jinyu was still resting, and was woken up by Shen Shuwei's push twice. He opened his hazy peach eyes and saw Shen Shuwei. "Sister-in-law, is there something wrong?" Shen Chu smiled and said, "It's time for dinner, I will cook it myself." Xiao Jinyu immediately became energetic when he heard it. "Really? I haven't eaten the food cooked by my sister-in-law for a long time. I almost vomited after eating the food in the military camp these days." Shen Shuwei looked up and down at Xiao Jinyu. His skin color was not as white as jade when he first came, but a little more wheat-colored. His figure seemed to be a little stronger. "I see that your muscles have become a little stronger." Xiao Jinyu said, "Sister-in-law, you don't understand. I practice riding and shooting every day, and I go to the battlefield to kill the enemy. When I am hungry, I can eat 2 big bowls of food even if it doesn't suit my appetite. Besides, I am not strong, but my muscles are stronger than before." "That's right. People who exercise every day will indeed have very strong muscles. Let's go and have dinner together." Shen Shuwei brought the greedy Xiao Jinyu to the tent. At this time, Xiao Jinyan was already dressed and sitting at the table. Xiao Jinyu endured the pain and walked over quickly. He sat down next to Xiao Jinyan and said with a smile, "Brother Prince, we brothers haven't seen each other for a long time. How about a few drinks later?" Xiao Jinyan glanced at his bandaged chest and said calmly, "You are injured, so you should not drink." Xiao Jinyu was touched by what he said. Although the prince didn't remember him, he still cared about him. "Then don't drink. Wait until I recover and then drink together." Xiao Jinyan, "Yes. The food has been served. Everyone is hungry now, especially Xiao Jinyu. Smelling the fragrance of the food, he can't wait to pick up the food with chopsticks and eat first." Qin Xiao walked in at this time. "Crown Princess, Wu Tan can't say it anymore." Xiao Jinyan raised his head and looked at Shen Shuwei. He was still thinking about the monk while eating. Shen Shuwei asked, "Did he say anything?" Wu Tan said that he was used to eating light food and didn't want the crown princess to deliberately make light meals to accommodate him. Qin Xiao said. "Okay." Shen Shuwei pointed to a relatively plain cabbage in front of him and said, "You can send this dish over." "I obey your command." Qin Xiao stepped forward, picked up the dish of cabbage and left. Xiao Jinyu took the serving chopsticks and put some meat into Xiao Jinyan's bowl, and said, "Brother Prince, my sister-in-law's cooking is delicious. Eat more. You have lost a lot of weight." Xiao Jinyan looked at the meat in the bowl, then looked at Xiao Jinyu's face that looked similar to him. After a long while, he said, "Thank you. Brother Prince, you are too polite." Xiao Jinyu chuckled twice and continued to eat the food in the bowl. He felt that he could eat 3 bowls of rice today. The bowls in the military camp are much larger than those in the palace. Shen Shuwei opened the lid, and the fragrance of chicken soup wafted out. She first filled 2 bowls and placed them in front of the 2 brothers. "Chicken soup, you try it while it's hot." Xiao Jinyu picked up the soup bowl and smelled it. "It smells good." He looked up at Shen Shuwei and praised generously, "With my sister-in-law here, I can satisfy my appetite." Xiao Jinyan glanced at Xiao Jinyu. Not only was he a little silly, but he also had a sweet mouth. He retracted his gaze and looked at the chicken soup in front of him. It smelled really good. He held the soup bowl in one hand and the spoon in the other, scooped a spoonful into his mouth and drank it. It was not greasy and tasted good. Shen Shuwei took the soup bowl and poured herself a bowl. She hadn't had chicken soup for a long time. She handed it to her mouth and took a sip. The soup was rich, not greasy, and delicious. The chicken soup was specially stewed for Xiao Jinyan and Xiao Jinyu, so Shen Shuwei only drank a bowl to satisfy her cravings, and let them drink the rest to replenish their bodies. After dinner, someone came to clean up the dishes. Xiao Jinyu still wanted to chat with the prince brother. It's been too long since they last saw each other. Seeing that he was safe, she secretly breathed a sigh of relief. I think she really wanted to chat with him. Brother Prince, tell me who saved you. Did you have any adventures? Xiao Jinyan looked at Xiao Jinyu, who was a little familiar with him. Although he was defeated in Xiao Jinyu's eyes, he was not familiar with him. You are so seriously injured, don't you need to rest? Xiao Jinyu said indifferently, it doesn't matter, I'm not very tired now. Xiao Jinyan said again, not very tired, just a little tired. Xiao Jinyu was stunned for a moment, then nodded, a little. Xiao Jinyan stood up, bent down, grabbed Xiao Jinyu's arm and helped him stand up together. In this case, then go back and rest early, rest enough to recuperate. Xiao Jinyu was a little confused, but Xiao Jinyan helped Xiao Jinyu to the door of the tent, and said to Qin Xiao at the door, Qin Xiao, send Prince Yu back to rest. I obey your order. Qin Xiao stepped forward a few steps, took Xiao Jinyu from his master, and then helped him walk away. Shen Shuwei. Xiao Jinyan seemed to dislike his brother after losing his memory. Xiao Jinyu was a little depressed, but he was no longer depressed when he thought that the prince brother was concerned about his health. After returning to the tent, the personal guard came in and handed over the letter with both hands. Master, it is a letter from concubine Han. When Xiao Jinyu heard that it was a letter from his wife, he couldn't wait to pick up the letter. He took it out and opened it in a few seconds. There were only a few short sentences on it, all asking him to pay more attention to his health and safety. The last sentence was, when will you return? After reading the letter, Xiao Jinyu missed his wife, and now he missed her even more. He wanted to fly back immediately and hug her in his arms. He took the letter and sat down in front of the desk, spread the letter paper, picked up the pen and dipped it in ink to start replying. Asterisk. Shen Shuwei waited for Xiao Jinyu to leave before taking a bath. He rode a horse for a long time today, and didn't rest for a while and cooked again. Now he sat in the bathtub, his body was soaked in warm water, which relieved a lot of fatigue. Perhaps it was because the bath was too comfortable, Shen Shuwei felt a little drowsy, and ended up falling asleep on the edge of the tub. Xiao Jinyan was waiting outside, looking at the furnishings in the tent, trying to regain a sense of familiarity. He came to the bed and sat down, and saw the pillow. He reached out to pick up the pillow, and saw a bracelet under the pillow, with a crystal clear stone on the red string. He picked it up and played with it for a while, and found that there were words engraved on the stone. Good night. Please support me with monthly tickets and recommendation tickets.